the Christian mindset has gotten so sucked into the American mindset, which is just basically the goal of your whole life is just is for you as an individual to be successful.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what does that even mean? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And it's just small. I think when you actually read the scriptures, it just feels small.
Welcome back to Young Married Christian. If you're new here, we are on a mission to see a gospel-centered home made available for every single child in the foster care system. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Young Married Christian, and today I'll be chopping it up with someone that Debo and I have been wanting to get on the show for the better part of a year now. He's the author of multiple books, his most recent being Take Back Your Family from the Tyrants of Burnout, Busyness, Individualism, and the Nuclear Ideal. He's the co-owner of Bible Builds, a business he bought with his 8-year-old daughter, where they retell a Bible story every week. Then you as a family build that story with Legos to win badges and prizes. One of the coolest ideas I think I've ever heard. He's the co-founder of Family Teams, an organization that helps families build multi-generational teams on mission through books, podcasts, courses, live events. My wife and I actually just attended one of their live events a few weeks ago, and it was probably the most transformational marriage experience we've done in our 7-year marriage. Ladies and gentlemen, his name is Jefferson Bethke. You better buckle up because this is going to be fun. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Dude, thanks for having me. It's a blast.
This is going to be so fun. Like I mentioned, Lisa and I went to the Family Teams event.
That's right. And we saw you at the Froyo late that night.
Saw you at the Froyo.
Yes.
So we're going to dive deep into all things marriage and parenting, Jeff, in this episode. But I want to start by having you share the story behind the viral video that seemingly kind of launched your career.
Yeah, 100%.
I've been kind of watching your career from afar for a while now, and this video, it's titled "Why I Hate Religion But Love Jesus." It's got 35 million views on YouTube right now. You published it 10 years ago, back in 2012. I know a lot of our listeners probably know you from that video, but they likely don't know the story behind it. So tell us that story.
Yeah, I mean, even to start there, it is funny. Even literally at Disneyland yesterday, it happened where someone came up to me and was like, it's a very fuzzy, it's weird when you're like have this internet face, but not a ton of reference. They're just like, do you do something on YouTube and do you hate religion? And I'm like, that's a shadow that's going to follow me forever, which I'm not sure I love or hate, but it's in the middle. I actually have gone on a journey with loving it, then hating it. Now I'm loving it again, just because, the Lord uses what he uses. But 2011, I graduate college. Right before I graduate college, though, I'm at a non-Christian, secular, liberal arts, 1,500 person school outside of Portland, Oregon. Just like if anyone's read Blue Like Jazz, there's a school in there called Reed College, and the way Donald Miller describes it is just like this wild place. The school I went to is almost identical to that, 20 minutes from there. So very similar. And so because of that, there's not a ton of like opportunities it's not very gospel warm. They're not very warm to the gospel in an environment like that. In some ways, I actually like that environment because it kind of it predicted the future, meaning like that college campus is now basically what the U.S. is. And if you read Coddling in the American Mind, that proves that. But anyways, long story short, there's not a lot of moments at those schools to really be able to kind of gently and winsomely and in a nuanced way communicate about Jesus. Except there was an open mic at that college where it's it's not one of the dumb ones where like people are just doing ridiculous talents or something funny or whatever. It's actually like serious skills, good singers, good musicians, stuff like that. But it's open mic, so just whoever wants to sign up that night. And I just had an idea like a month before. They do it every month, and I went to them and stuff, and I was like, you know what? Like this would just be such a good place to engage the fellow students about Jesus. I think like 500 people show up, and it's a 1,500 person school, so very large percentage. It was a small town. It's like the only thing to do, and it was actually like good entertainment. So I was like, well, I can't just get up there and preach, right? That's not what you do at an open mic. That's, I'll probably get tomatoes thrown at me or something. So then I didn't have any history with spoken word. I'd never done it before, nothing. But I would say it was the culture I was raised in, meaning I love hip hop. I was kind of raised in an urban context. Spoken word is certainly hip hop adjacent. And so I always loved it. And I just kind of like, let's take a stab at it. And so I was like, I think that'd be perfect. Like if I rhyme and say it artistically, then they'll listen. And so I literally wrote that poem in that context. And so it's funny too, fast forward to see it go viral and get all these critiques about it. And it's like, man, 90% of the critiques I actually agreed with. It was just like, you don't know that I actually wrote this for a very particular Portland 22-year-old non-Christian context. And so like, I'm not giving a blanket statement. So I wrote it for that context. and just did it at the open mic. And that was that. Like just moved on, thought graduated high school, graduated college, started working at an after school community like center coaching like middle school soccer students. I was going to go back and get my master's, but I just wanted a 1-year break. And so I just went and like picked up a job with a buddy of mine. And while I was there, I was home on one of the weekends. My buddy was home from college on one of the weekends because he was still in college. He's a videographer friend. He was 19 at the time. I was 21 at the time. And he was like, hey, I'm bored. Like, let's make a video. Because that's what millennials do back then, kind of what Gen Z does now. Now they say, I'm bored, let's make a TikTok or something, So literally, like, we were not trying to do anything special, but I had already written a poem. So I was like, oh, I have this thing over here. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's make a fun, creative video like that. And he's like a professional videographer. So then he was like, he's 19. He was able to make it look way fancier than it was. You know what I mean? So we literally just like shot it, edited it, put it on YouTube, thought our moms and our friends would see it. And it was overnight, which was crazy. It wasn't a slow burn. It was literally like I had no platform. I wasn't trying to do anything cool or special. And we uploaded it. And I remember waking up to 500,000 views.
Wow.
Which is crazy. And I was like, and then it just like snowballed from there. And then the news shows. And it was another fun fact. I don't want to ever repeat that 2 weeks of my life. It was like the most insane, pressure-filled, vitriolic to some degree, because as most people know who've gone, you're so dehumanized at that level of eyeballs. And so it was very interesting. The Lord taught me a lot. I'm thankful for mentors around me, and we were able to parlay it into a lot of things. But that's basically how it happened. It was total accident, and then we just tried to ask the Lord, like, man, how do I steward this, and what should we do with it? Yeah.
Wow. So it's been 10 years. Yep. Did that in 2012.
I'm old.
If you had to write another poem about loving Jesus, hating religion, what would you change about it?
What would I change? Oh, that's a very good question. I'll just be totally honest. I'm less reformed now. That's the best way. So if we go in context, and there's not we can't elaborate on this for like a half an hour. So I'll just give quick, somewhat caricature versions of what I'm trying to say. But I would say, less reformed and more Anglican, which is hilarious. That's me, in my actual like spiritual demeanor, and which is funny because that would, most people would put the Anglican tradition. They call that Catholic light, which is actually hilarious, even though it's Protestant. That side of the tradition definitely would be considered the religious side of the tradition. So I find that funny. I probably would still, honestly, it's hard because it's like if I actually it's like a yes and no question where it's like, for what I wrote it for, I would probably write it identically still. Because for what I wrote it for, I was talking to 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, post-Christian, right? Who, when they hear anything about Christianity, it conjures up a lot of certain images that I wanted to go in their brain and take out. So that was kind of the rhetorical device I was using for that poem. But actually, like my own personal theology, I would probably round it off in a little bit different way. I'm a lot more liturgical now in my journey. So I do find that very fascinating, right? But it's funny though, it's like, I think that can still all live together. So I don't actually inherently disagree with any specific large thing I say in that poem. The best way I could say it is just my bullseye, or like my DNA now is just a different like smell, a little bit different fragrance of Christianity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that a way to put it?
Totally.
So it is interesting to think about it like that though. I sounded angry and angsty and like a 21-year-old kid in that poem, and I just wouldn't say that stuff. You know what I mean?
I rewatched it yesterday, and I was just like, man, 10 years later, this thing still hits.
It is crazy, which I think that is the Lord, but I think that's also a truth of, that's really encouraging to me, because I definitely feel like, there's a lot of spiritual gifts, and I wouldn't consider these 3 spiritual gifts. These are more like offices, but the classic 3 of the king, priest, and prophet. Most people are one of those 3 in their demeanor. They're either highly priestly, pastoral, they're the encourager, they're highly relational, king, high vision, high leader, or prophet, meaning like prophetic, like truth, and just kind of cut, And so I'm definitely prophetic in my demeanor and all my books and all that stuff. And the fact that it still hits a decade later is encouraging, because I feel like it actually supports that like, oh yeah, that shows that it was prophetic in some degree, because anything that's prophetic should still be able to stand true no matter what time it's in, you know what I mean? Because it's a more sharp truth.
Yeah. Jeff, I mentioned that Lisa and I, with a couple of our friends, we went to your family teams event a few weeks ago, and one of the most profound concepts that I walked away with personally from that event was how you guys define family. Yeah. You and Jeremy.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about the modern definition, even how the church now defines family? juxtaposed to what you believe the biblical definition
100%.
of family is.
Yeah, what most people don't realize is both Christian or non-Christian, the Western ideal of family is actually the same. I just think the Christian version is just wearing different clothes, but underneath it's the same person. And the Western idea of family is actually highly individualistic, more individualistic than any human culture in all of human history. But the way we like to say it is, in the Western view of family, people see the individual not only as the most important thing, but they see the family as nothing more than a springboard for the individual success, which basically means a family is just there so that the individual can flourish, can kind of jump over the family, leapfrog over the family, or use the resources that the family has for them to go kind of fly. Like, the image, me and Jeremy always make fun of the famous Western image we use for family, which is the nest, right? Which is the perfect example for this bad vision, which is that, right? Like what do birds do? Right? Like it's this little cute, protective, secure little thing where the mom's feeding them with the little wormies from the mouth and all that. And then at some point, the bird gets old enough and just like leaves and is gone and leaves the nest and then just never comes back. There's no integration. There's no web. There's no connectivity. There's no generational, dynamic, et cetera. And so that's the Western view of family. Now, most people, when they hear that, they actually go, oh yeah, that sounds great. Now, what's interesting though is it actually is over and against not only the biblical model, but what I would say even people that aren't Christian, but just more of the ancient model. So pre-industrial revolution, most families operated in the exact opposite, right? Where it would actually be the individual is part of a family team, and that family team is not only generational, so meant to go over 3, 4, 5 generations, but then also usually has some collective mission. Now, it's very easy pre-industrial revolution for it to be a very simple mission where it's like, we're blacksmiths, we're farmers, we're whatever. But certainly biblically, I think God, heightens that mission to be a family. His vision is actually that he puts families together to, basically go create and subdue the entire earth. Like the Genesis mandate of, make beauty out of chaos, bring flourishing out of the disorder. He basically gives that mission in Genesis, and then you see him show that you can't do that without a family team. So that's what I find is interesting is if you have a mission that an individual can accomplish, then the mission's too small, right? And so the best way to put it is, in Genesis, God says, he puts the man in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. So then he tells them, hey, here's the Garden of Eden. I want you to make the rest of the world look like this. So God kind of creates this prototype in the garden, which just always surprises people. People kind of, when they imagine the Garden of Eden, they always imagine the whole earth, like beautiful, amazing fruit, trees, animals, etc. But actually, if you really read it in the context of the Hebrew scriptures, it's actually almost like prototype language. It's actually saying, hey, and I'm just guessing on the numbers here, but it's like, hey, these 5 square miles, God has done his work. God made them orderly. God made them beautiful out of those primordial waters and the chaos and all the stuff we see in Genesis, right? But then outside of those boundaries, it's still chaos. Like that's actually the argument Genesis is making. Outside of the Garden of Eden, it's still primordial. It's still deserty. It's thorns and thistles. It's chaotic, all this type of stuff, right? Excuse me. And so God, what he's actually saying there is he puts this family in it. And then I think what he basically does, he tells them to look outside into the chaos and say, hey, this is your prototype. So study this. Now go out there and make that look like this, right? And that's a massive job. That's a massive job. Like it's about as big a job as you can do because it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of resources. It's going to take a lot of people. And so God then gives them the solution to that. He says, okay, you're going to need a partner. So then he gives Adam a partner, Eve, to do that. And he says, okay, you're also not going to be able to do that with just a partner. You're going to need a lot of generations. So then he says, make babies, right? And so it's actually inherent in the Genesis mandate that God gives them such a large mission that they literally could not do it if they weren't a family team living generationally. And I just think that's so wildly different than what we see. The Christian mindset has gotten so sucked into the American mindset, which is just basically the goal of your whole life is just is for you as an individual to be successful. Yeah. It's like, well, what does that even mean? What does that look like? Yeah. And it's just small. I think when you actually read the scriptures, it just feels small.
Yeah. So when you guys broke it down, hey, the modern definition of family being, we look at family as a springboard for individual success. And I remember when you forget if it was you or Jeremy that said it on stage, I remember thinking, yeah, like that sounds right. Exactly. Yeah, springboard for individual success. When you juxtapose it to this idea that no, the biblical definition of a family we believe is it is a multi-generational team on mission.
Yeah.
Man, it completely opens your mind to
feels way larger,
completely different, like
way bigger,
way bigger, more substantive.
The only nuance I would give to that too is, I think the second one includes the first one, but the first one's too small to include the second one. Meaning, I do think to some degree a springboard for the individual success is inherently against a multi-generational family team. But I would say just the general success of an individual is not against a family team. The general success of an individual is part of a family team on mission. And so I think they actually go hand in hand. It's kind of like, think about the Golden State Warriors, right? Like Steph Curry cannot be Steph Curry with how good he is individually without the context of the Warriors as a team.
Yeah.
Now, if he was just trying to be about his individual success, get MVPs, they probably wouldn't be as good, but he plays such good team basketball. So I think it actually, like, some people say, oh, well, does that just mean crush the individual? It doesn't mean that. It actually means I think an individual has a better chance to succeed if they're thriving in their role as a team member on the team. Yeah. That's all, only nuance I would add to that.
Yeah, I mean, we walked out of that event, and I've now started praying over JJ, working it into what we pray over JJ every night, to say, like, man, God, like I want him to have clarity on the purpose that you have for him.
Totally.
But now there's this nuance to it that it's like, and I want the purpose that you give to him to be aligned to the mission that you have put our family on.
Exactly.
And so God, give us clarity for what our mission is as a family.
Yep.
And because how exciting is it for him to not just grow up hopefully understanding what his purpose is. I hope that happens at a young age.
Totally.
But for there to be an alignment there with what your family is on mission to do, I just think it's so powerful.
When I think there's even, if we can even go on a dovetail real quick, I think there's a fascinating case study there with evangelicals versus Jewish kids, right? So you look at, and I actually read one sociologist, he actually argues this is why Jewish people are the most successful people in history, and literally statistically, that's not something that can be argued, They're like 0.02% of the human population. I think there's like 15, 20 million Jewish people in the world, and there's 8 billion people. We just passed that number last week. So the statistically, quote unquote, they're statistically insignificant on the human in regards to the population versus Earth's population, but yet they have somewhere between, I think it's like 30% of all the Pulitzer Prizes in the world have been given to them. 50% of all U.S. patents belong to the Jewish community. I think 35% of all Nobel Prizes, which is in literature, science, all the different categories belong to them. So, I mean, like, the disproportion is crazy. And the sociologists, a couple of people have studied this. And one actually, I don't know if this is quite the answer, but one supplemental reason one argues that has happened is he kind of says it tongue in cheek, but he just says all the Jewish kids have had a head start. And what he means by that is when Jewish kids are 13, they're told who they are. Every other 13-year-old in the world is say, go find yourself. And so then a 13-year-old outside of the Jewish community wastes 10, 15 years of their life going and finding themselves. Then they're 25, then they're 30, maybe they find themselves, and then maybe then they'll go start doing something important. When you're 13, it's like you are told who you are, and then you just go work or go to school. Like, you know what I mean? And it's kind of tongue in cheek, but he just says they have a head start, meaning like by the time they're 20, they're so deep in all these things because they've been able to concentrate on their life vocation because they're not wasting any time on trying to find who they are. There's the zero. They know exactly who they are in the community, in their faith, the bar mitzvah, Abraham, the lineage, all these different types of things. And then that's also why they have such a high retainment rate. I think it's like 94% of people, if you grow up in a Jewish, religious, observant home, stay Jewish, when it's 30% of evangelical kids grow up in an evangelical home, stay evangelical. So, I mean, like, it's wild. It's wild when you start looking at those numbers and thinking about it. And I think that's why. That's why, because there's none of that, like, individual, go search for yourself. Now, in the West, we hear that and it sounds so stuffy. It sounds so like, oppressive. But it's like, but look at the examples of people who don't do that, and that doesn't look oppressive to me. It looks like they're flourishing, right? So I find that so interesting.
Yeah. So you mentioned something at the event that I wrote down. You said when individuals become wealthy, they purchase loneliness.
Yeah, that's a David Brooks quote.
And,
Is that good?
So, yeah, it's so good. And when you talk about, our society being as individualistic as it is, that quote hits so hard.
Yeah.
When individuals become wealthy,
they purchase loneliness.
It's
insane.
We want to.
It's insane.
Yeah. Why do we want to cocoon ourselves away from
That's almost
community?
what we're buying. We're buying the protection, the loneliness. And I was just seeing some stuff on Instagram the other day. I think it was on Vox or New York Times, but yeah, tracking the amount of hours the average American spends alone has exponentially grown the last decade. They want to just be alone, right? And they even took out 2020 for that, by the way, too, for the stats, because it was such a obviously crazy year with the people staying at home. But yeah, we like purchase loneliness. We want to be alone. We're buying, so it's like, are we buying security or are we buying loneliness? I don't know. But I find it very fascinating. And yeah, the David Brooks, I think that quote came from his article called The End of the Nuclear Family, which in my opinion is one of the best, most salient, free pieces of reading on just like what philosophically has happened to the family the last 200 years. But yeah, what a quote.
Yeah.
What a quote.
So when we were talking a couple days ago ahead of this, you had mentioned, that there's so much historical context.
Yeah.
When you talk about marriage and family, you talked about all the way, the origins of timekeeping and
Totally.
Henry Ford. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different moments that I think kind of just show what has gone wrong or what has happened. The one is certainly the first big one, I think, that really just radically reshaped the family. Kind of in this cost and effect thing, right? Where like anytime something is good for us, there's always going to be a consequence. There's always just a ramification, right? And so it's actually in the David Brooks article as well. He opens with such a fascinating image where he kind of it's a thought experiment and kind of a philosophical thing to think through, where he's like, when you think of that mantle picture, like the picture you print up above the fireplace of a family, today in 2022, what do most people think of? We ask them to conjure that up, they think of, in that picture, probably 4 people: a mom, dad, 2 kids, maybe a dog, maybe a white fence, right? He's like, if you were to go back to 1750, 1850, and ask them that question, that picture would almost guaranteed probably be about 25 to 35 people, right? And it'd be about 4 generations. And be about two sides of grandparents, 2 sides of parents, probably about 8 to 10 kids, and then on top of that, probably about 5 to 8 kind of I forget what he calls them, but basically like just household like helpers. Like there's kind of this integrated, if you were decently middle class, you had people that just helped on the farm or helped with the barn or helped with the house or whatever. And I'm not talking about like servants. It was like, I forget the word for it, but just like employees, basically, because businesses were held in the home. So just employees, kind of just a business was also, but they were integrated in so much that they were even considered part of the family. That's an interesting picture right there. Okay, 35 people versus 4 people.
Yeah.
What do you think of when you say the word family? How did we get from one to the other? There was a lot of steps along the way, but the first one is definitely the Industrial Revolution. So think about what happened with that. Okay, so pre-Industrial Revolution, we had some different, of course, the agricultural era. Even before that, we had hunter-gatherers, et cetera. But pretty much almost all families pre-1825, 1850. Were just like centered around the home, meaning the economic activity of the mom and the dad were perfectly integrated into the home activity of the mom and the dad. They weren't 2 separate activities. There was no such thing as going off to work. There was no such thing as commuting. There was no such thing as factories. The work, which you had to do, which was really hard, was centered in the home. You either farmed or you were a blacksmith right down the road or, integrated in the neighborhood. And what's interesting about that is it just felt integrated. Your kids were a part of it, all these different types of things. And so when we get into the Industrial Revolution, which gave us amazing progress, which gave us the railroads, which gave us, cars, which gave us all these things, the consequence of it is that what it did is it actually ripped the father out of the home, and it took the economic activity of the home out of the home. And when you take the economic activity out of the home, you create a vacuum, and then what's left? There's nothing there. Like, what's the energy or the DNA or the centering point of a family once the economic activity is taken out of the home? Well, the only thing that can really be given or be vacuumed in is consumption, that's literally what we've done since 1850. We've just created a bunch of stuff for the home to be entertained, for it to feel good. There's literally like nothing of importance happens there. Now, we could argue the most important thing is like the safety, the security, and the love, which is true, but that doesn't get us very far, right? You can have a loving, secure, amazing home, and your kids most likely, if it's a consumption-based family, will it just won't work. It's not thriving. It's not on mission. And so that's the first one that really happened. It's like, okay, now let's talk about can we rewind the clock? No. So it's not just like, hey, everyone work from home. That's not what we're saying. But I'm just thinking like, understand the ramifications. I work from home sometimes. I travel a lot for work, so I'm all over the place. But the main issue is not that, okay, work from home now. It's just, but how do we the main question is, how do we make sure our family and our work life is integrated? That's really the key question. It's almost like Wendell Berry talks about this, where he says it's more about the spirit of the thing than the reality of the thing, where he's like, I forget exactly how he says it, but I think he uses the word agrarian spirit for farming spirit and then factory spirit for the Industrial Revolution. And he says, people can have an agrarian spirit, but with a factory mindset, or a factory spirit with an agrarian mindset. And so what he means is you can still go to work, but use the agrarian, quote unquote, meaning like the farming integrated spirit and mindset in your home, which is just lives in rhythms, lives in integration, cares about all the pieces, stuff like that, and doesn't just center around consumption. And so what I would say to people listening is the main way to fight that certainly is not just work from home, but just like, does your home have a mission? That's really, at the end of the day, what the economic activity back then was doing. So you don't have to have the economic activity at home, but what you have to have is a mission. The home has to have a mission, or else the whole point of the home is just to get kind of like fat, sick, and entertained. You know what I mean? Just kind of like, just to kind of just enjoy yourself. And then it's kind of just like you just are gorging, and there's nothing to, there's no blessing. So yeah, I know that's the first one I would say. And there's a couple other ones if we want to keep talking out about it. But the Industrial Revolution one was big because it just created this massive vacuum where then, and Iron John is a really fascinating book on this, where he argues, since the Industrial Revolution, most kids can't even actually describe what their dad does for work because they don't see it. They literally don't see it. Dad's gone, dad comes home. Now, again, we don't need to change that. It's just a question of think about the implications of that. Like we're so disconnected, we're so disintegrated. So that one was a big one. And then even, and I think even the factory spirit has seeped into families as well, of like, not only do we send dad off to a factory now, but now the factory has kind of been shipped into our spirit, where we just want to do things efficiently, quick, pump them out. And that's such a spirit of the factory and the Industrial Revolution, which is really interesting.
So what's when we were talking about this before, you had mentioned kind of the implications, or what does this mean? Really thinking through what this means, when it comes to divorces and blended families. Yeah. What's the nuance there?
Yeah, I think the thing I love about the family team's methodology is it actually works for everyone better than the Western family ideal. So the Western family ideal really only works with the two parents, with, and even David Brooks talks about this. Like he talks about in the nuclear family, which is not the biblical, even though some people think it is, not the biblical vision of family. The nuclear family is the two parents, two kids, white picket fence, and the kids wear helmets and it's cute and secure and beautiful and amazing. And they homeschool or something.
No sarcasm whatsoever.
Exactly, which we homeschool too. But so no knock on homeschool. But again, I think he actually calls it the enterprise family, and we would say family team, but the enterprise family, the 25 people, the 15 people, the 35 people, the multi-generations, is so much stronger. Because one argument he makes in that article is the nuclear family is really only possible for upper middle class, rich, like white people, because it's so fragile. Meaning the minute anything tries to threaten that, divorce, adultery, death, go on and on, disease, whatever, the whole thing breaks because it's such a fragile asset. It's so fragile, right? The whole family just blows up. But, excuse me, if it's an enterprise family, you got 25 people, you got 22 people, you got 15 people, you got grandmas, aunties, uncles, you got a vocational thing kind of integrated around it, all this different types of stuff. And then a divorce happens, that will still absolutely rock that family, but the whole family will catch them. Do you know what I mean? And I find that very, very compelling. That's true. That the actual family team model has a bigger fence for everyone than the model over here, because this one's so fragile, right? And so that's what I always say to blend it. Anyone in kind of those more like what they would consider exception categories, or maybe it's turned out differently than they've thought over the years. Not only can the Lord redeem it, but I also think the Lord can use it. He also will catch you, and then on top of that. That's where the mission things comes in. Every team is different, right? So again, back to the sports analogies, you have the Golden State Warriors, you have the Cavaliers, you have the Toronto Raptors, whatever. They're all wildly different teams with wildly different identities. They don't shoot the same, they don't play the same, they don't look the same, right? And so I that's what I love is, if you're a blended family, or if you're a single, like I was raised in a single parent household, you're a single parent home. There was actually some parts of me growing up with my mom as a single parent that I actually think got this right more than other people, because we had to. Me and my mom were such a team because we had to be. You know what I mean? There's such that nucleus. So I would say lean into the team spirit. And what I mean by that is don't try to be someone else's team. Look at the team in front of you. What players do you have on the bench? What coaches are in the game, coaching this team? And then like, what does the Lord have for you, right? And so I think that's highly encouraging of like, okay, blended family. Well, then what's the mission? What does God have for this family, these kids, these parents, this dynamic, this web? And there's going to be strains with that. Of course, there's going to be difficulties with that. But I would say that's actually the encouraging thing. And we found that in family teams and case studies over and over again, where people, when they hear this, it actually makes them come alive, because what it does is it gives these families so much energy of like, oh yeah, this is the team God's given me. Maybe it wasn't the team I thought I was going to have 20 years ago, but this is the team I have, and God has a mission for us. And so discovering that and going through that process, I think, is really key.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned homeschool. I want to dive deep into family teams, but before we dive into that, you mentioning homeschool,
Yeah.
I know a lot of our listeners are really wrestling with, what's going on in public schools and everything it's so divisive politically, and what are they teaching my kids, and what's your take? What led you and Alyssa ultimately to choosing homeschool?
Ooh, we could do a 3-hour podcast just on that. I love this conversation. There's a lot of stuff. Where do I want to take this? I think couple things. There's a lot of practicals, first of all, for our life. So that I would honestly say that's the main reason for us. I travel a ton. We travel a ton. That's actually the main one. That's one of the main ones where I just didn't want. My main thing is, if we could, I didn't want it to feel like my vocation and my work is constantly ripping me away from the family team. And one thing that competes with that is if the kids were in school, can't take them out, always got to ask permission, stuff like that. So for us, the way we integrate our family is they come with, like here, as in literally in this room. I mean, as we were recording this, 2 of my kids are in the other room, because I just constantly am bringing them with, integrating them, and making it feel like we're always kind of doing something together. So that's a big practical reason. Philosophically, I would, to your point, there is certainly, I wouldn't even go with like the spiritual side yet. I would say philosophically, even the actual education system, I don't mean like the values of the education system in the sense of like the darkness that's there, but I mean just actually like Western education, butts in chairs for eight hours, I disagree with. Like, I think that's actually not how humans learn. I think that's not how we are meant to learn. I think it's a way. I think our brains are created differently than that. So I actually really wrestle with I think the Western schooling model is basically factory farming. It's basically just high efficiency. How do you just pump people down the assembly line, give them some standardized tests, get everyone stuffed with information, and then you graduate, high school not needing probably 85% of that.
Yeah.
And it was a waste of your time, and it was a waste of your energy. So it's not very tactical at all. It's high. It's like cast wide net, right? Now, if that's what you want, that's fine. Now, there's practical reasons why some people would want that, right? Either whether their job, they can't get away, they can't, do that. There's so the way we say it as family teams is like, you need to do what's best for your family. So we have people that we know have kids in private school, public school, and homeschool, all 3 of them, based on just what's good for their family. But I will push back on a couple things for those who do public school or put their kids in school. A couple things I already mentioned, just think about, is Western education actually the best for your kids? Sir Ken Robinson has one of the most successful TED Talks of all time on Western education. And he was an educator his whole life, but it's a heavy critique with like 50 million views. One of the most famous TED Talks. People can watch that. That honestly, that was, those almost like an earworm, with music. That was one of those talks like I watched like 10 years ago, and it infected me. It literally just put me down a rabbit hole from that talk, that's honestly why I have the views I have now. So I would say watch that talk. He says it more articulate than I do. Now to the philosophical part, I think that's an interesting argument. A couple of years ago, I definitely would have been like, it's whatever. Like, just put your kids wherever you need to put them, whatever's best for your family. I do think public education is getting progressively darker. I think that's just true. Like weird stuff is happening. Like what they're allowing, what they're teaching. Certainly where I'm from, I'm from Washington State, and the Northwest is just wild with what they're teaching the kids on sexuality and things. So I'm like, that's dark. That's dark. So as a parent, you need to consider that. You need to consider that environment. Now, I've had some arguments with friends of mine where they kind of say, well, my kid's a little missionary, I want him to be a light. Sure, but one thing missionaries never do is they don't send their missionary to get trained at the enemy's school, right? So last time I checked, missionaries go through a training process that's pretty significant. Usually, 5 or 10 years of learning a language, learning the culture, learning the strategy, and then they get sent to the mission field. So to send a 7-year-old, to a mission field in the enemy's training system, philosophically, I don't mean the actual, like what you're learning in math, because that's great, but I mean like the values that are there. That just seems a little facetious to me. So I just think like we got to be aware of that. And I can't, it's not compelling to me. I think it's one of the least compelling arguments is like, I'm going to send my kid as a missionary. That's ridiculous, I think, for a 7-year-old, Now, I believe the same thing, by the way. I am absolutely, like, I'm not sheltering our kids. Like I'm hoping that our kids graduate at 18 with, being able to, talk about things more than probably any of their peers, in regards to what is happening in the world, culture events, sexuality, this, business, Bitcoin, finance, I don't care what it is. Yeah. But I want them involved in talking about all of it because that's what we talk about at the dinner table. I'm not trying to shelter them at all. But what I am trying to do is train them so that then they are enormously cultured and strong in their worldview to be sent out once they're adults. I'm seeing my kids as missionaries, but I'm seeing the whole kid process as a training ground and the adult process as the mission field. Yeah. And so I think it's a little kind of putting the cart before the horse to kind of say, they're going to go tell their friends about Jesus. I do know some kids that, man, power to them. Those families are those families. They are just the revival families. They just go into public schools and little 7-year-olds are praying for their neighbors and doing. I do know some of those families, so I think that's actually real. But I think like, are you that family? I don't know. So. Yeah, I have so many thoughts on homeschool, but I tried to hit some quick ones right there.
What about the social component of it? I know.
Oh yeah, that's big too. So then that's probably, thanks for actually mentioning that. I forgot about that one. That's actually probably the most important one to me. So one of my favorite parenting books is Hold On to Your Kids. It's actually but written by 2 secular psychologists, 0 Christianity in it. And it's just purely behavioral psychology book. For one of them is a trauma specialist, kid psychologist, and I think one of them is just a regular clinical psychologist. The whole premise of that book, Hold On to Your Kids, is what they call peer attachment syndrome, and they consider this an epidemic. And what their research has basically found is time and time again, all these parents are coming to them, usually around when the kid's around 11 to 14, and basically just saying, my kid is wildly turning into a different kid. Doesn't like me anymore, hates me, slams the door on me, won't let me see their phone, blah, 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 all this stuff. And they used to be amazing and loving and blah, blah, all this stuff. He's like, and they just go, what happened? And he's like, this is probably every day of our week, all day, every single appointment with every single parent. And what he calls of it is he calls those attachment affairs, because he basically says, and this is what they found. He goes, if a spouse came to you with those same behaviors, by the way, if a spouse came to you and said, all of a sudden, maybe over a course of 3 months, cold shoulder, don't look at me, don't touch me, slam the door, don't look at my phone, all these different types of things. What would you think? He goes, everyone and their mom would think affair, like something like you're doing something with someone you shouldn't be doing. I can tell. And he says that's basically what peers are doing in the West, but emotionally, right? And he calls them attachment affairs. And so he goes deep. They go deep into the book on attachment theory and how basically they prove it with data and science, how our kids in the West are around other children with no adults or only one adult around more than any time in human history. Meaning like our kids are just around other kids more than ever. And what it's doing is it's setting this peer attachment environment where at the end of the day, they're around their peers so much, they begin to detach from their parents as kind of the North Star of their existence, and then reattach to peers as the new North Star of their existence. It's almost like gangs, really. That's what the gangs do too. It's just more in an emotional way. And what's funny is when you hear that, it honestly does seem so like I don't think, even though the data supports it, I think all of us also go, yeah, we see that, like that makes sense. Because we just see that in kids, right? The teenager that's, and I find that, and so the argument of that book is just, and they don't, there's not an ounce in there where they say go homeschool or private, any of that. They're assuming your kid's going to be in public school. But the whole premise of that book is just be careful that your kid does not get peer attached. That's the whole premise of the book. And they give you ways to do that, and they give you ways to do that because he goes like that. What it basically does is you lose your kid's heart, and it's very difficult to get him back.
So how do you keep that peer attachment from happening?
The main thing is what they call, they have a bunch of different practices in the book. One they call gathering, which is really interesting. It's the simplest exercise. But they study this like in the animal kingdom too. And they show it where when a child leaves a parent, every time a child leaves a parent in the animal kingdom, the parent has like the tiniest 5-second like attachment ritual, whether it's a lion like licking the head or the fur and then sending him out or whatever. And then same thing when they return. So it's called like gathering practices, where it's basically there needs to be a genuine holding of the attachment, even though it's quick. It's almost like a secret handshake vibe, but emotionally, between parent and kid. Every single time a kid is about to go into a peer attached environment. And it sounds almost like dumb. Sounds like it's like, how does that really work? No, it really does. They've literally like done sample studies of like groups that don't and groups that do. And it's something as simple as like the genuine look in the eyes, the hug and the kiss when they get home and when they leave. And he goes, what's interesting is if you actually think about it, a lot of parents don't do it. A lot of times a kid will get home and they're like doing the dishes or whatever. And it's just, oh, hi, and they just boom, they go up to their room and they're gone. And he goes, if you do that over, a day, then another day, then another day, then weeks, then months, then years, you lose your kid. It's that simple. And it sounds so small, but it is. It's like this heart level connection where you're staying the North Star for your kid. And you could read the book. They give like 5-10 different examples, but that's the one that's always stuck out with me as just such an easy practical advice. Because it's just about retaining attachment. Yeah. Because what happens, he goes, think about the flip. The reason they become peer attached is what do their peers do when they get to school? Run up to them. Oh, what'd you do this weekend? They attach and they have those gathering practices. So it's like the tiniest little things, but we are such behavioral psychological creatures that it is interesting that little things like that can actually like change the whole trajectory.
So is that what you and Alyssa do with what you talked about at the event, which was the breakfast benediction?
Yeah, exactly. So for us, the way we do that is little prayers in the morning. So we do like a 15, 20 second like liturgical prayer. That's a perfect example of that. That's just us like, okay, every single day that sets the tone. It's us as a family. It's us together. It's connective. And then we go on with our day. And then same, when we return. So yeah, exactly. Stuff like that is huge.
Yeah. What do you guys do when they come back?
I would say that one doesn't have to be anything magical. It literally is just like like hello, like real genuine, not just like hi, but like eye to eye. I get down on the ground. How are you doing? Hug, how did your day go? Or something like that. But again, we're such habitual creatures that like something like that begins to be in the kid's body if they've been doing that every day for 5-10 years. Do you know what I mean? And it really does. And I think the language they use in the book is that they say it like sheds the day, even though it's so quick, it almost like sheds whatever happened the last 8 hours,
So I want to dive into family teams. It was really helpful for me to hear you and Jeremy connect family to sports. Specifically, you talk about the role of a father being similar to the role of a coach.
Totally.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, the thing we always say in family teams is, if you were to, who's the archetype of a perfect father in the scriptures? It certainly to me seems like Abraham, right? Like high vision, right? Like someone with a vision that says, okay, I'm gonna live with a promise and faith that God has given me that's going to outlast my life. So I have a large vision that even outlasts who I am in my life. But what's interesting is, when you think of who Abraham probably most looks like today, I don't think that version of Abraham, meaning like huge vision, building a team. It says, when he goes to one of the craziest little sentences in the scripture is when he goes to go rescue Lot, it says he takes 300 of his household men. Okay, that's a massive household, right? Those are not people related to him. That's just basically his employees. So I mean, like this man has like an empire. This man is an empire of a household. Okay, so then you think about what he's got, and it's crazy. So when you put Abraham in our context, who does he most look like in our context? I don't think he looks most like the Western father. I think he most looks like a Texas high school football coach, right? Meaning like the vision that a Texas high school football coach has is crazy. The kind of the honor that they have in a city, the reputation, the way that they coach a team, which is the biggest part of it, the way that they are honored by that team. And so I would say that's a big one too, and that's why we say they're like coaches, because I use this kind of, kitschy juxtaposition in my book, Take Back Your Family, but most parents in the West are babysitters when I think the biblical vision is a coach. Now, of course, this is just, being facetious, but a babysitter, whatever a babysitter does, a coach does too. A coach just does a lot more, right? So a babysitter's, their whole job is to keep the kids safe. The babysitter's job is to keep the kids fed. The babysitter's job is to keep them secure. The babysitter's job is usually to like avert, the one place it does actually rubber meets the road with the coach, it's very much against the coach, not with it, is a babysitter's job is usually to avert like any pain Like kind of like no anything problematic. Just what can we do to like solve it? Like, do you need some candy or right? That's basically Western parenting. A coach is usually the opposite, especially with pain. A lot of times, the coach is actually trying to induce it, right? Because it grows you and it stretches you so I think like seeing yourself as a coach is such a radically helpful framework for a parent, because it's no, your job. And two, by the way, a babysitter usually has a vision nothing past that kid's day. Like, it's like, I just see you as today. A coach has a vision of that kid 10 years from now. And I remember that growing up. Like, the reason the analogies are so powerful to me is because I played sports for 17 years, probably 5 years till end of college. And there's a couple times where, man, those coaches, one of the most pivotal times in my baseball career was a college coach sophomore year, who just the way he coached me and the way he worked on my mechanics and the way he spoke life into me, he absolutely believed in a better version of me than I did. He was just so far ahead of me. He was so like, I see what you can do if you just do X, Y, and Z. And he pushed me to get there. I'm like, man, that's a parent. A parent has a vision past the kid, farther than the kid, for the future of the kid as an adult, not just for their consumption or their happiness or their enjoyment. And so, yeah, and then it totally changes how you parent day to day too, because you're not trying to solve problems. You are trying to solve problems. You're not trying to stuff problems. You're trying to train. Like, coaches train. So there's two tools that are usually in a Western parent's toolbox, and that is reward and discipline. Both great tools, by the way. Parents should use those. But if you think about them, they're both reactionary. You can only give a reward once the kid does something first, so you're reacting to them, and you can only discipline them once they do something first, so that you're reacting to them. There's a third tool in the tool belt that a coach is really good at that Western parents aren't, and that's called training. And training is also proactive, not reactive. Training is the only one where you say, hey, you haven't done anything, but I have a vision for you. We're going to do these 10 reps, and you're going to be better and stronger at the end of this day. And so, like, man, what a wild picture of parenthood, right? Whether it's financial, whether it's eating, whether it's health, nutrition, I don't know, whether it's school, math, whatever. Actually see your job as like trying to train your kids for the vision of what God has for them on your team. And man, it just wildly opens up so much possibility.
Well, and I think of what you said earlier, so much of the setup for how do you actually do that is exactly what you're doing with bringing your two kids to Orlando. It's the integration of not separating your kids from what you do for work, but bringing them into it. Yeah. And it's in that time and space that you can actually have those conversations.
100%.
You're setting yourself up to have those
100%. It's it's the classic stuff's caught, not taught. And yeah, I mean, I think about the compound interest of bringing them on trips and them having to, sell books at the back of the room while I'm speaking, to them meeting, a lot of different people, to them, like my kids will probably have more adult interaction with kids than probably almost any of their friends by the time they're 18, because they're mostly around adults. Now that's partly intentional, but it's also like, I'm not trying to keep them away from kids in some degree. Like, we love kids, they love their friends, they have friends at birthday parties, all that stuff. But there's just like that'll form them in a different way. And it is intentional training. It's like, hey, I actually want you to be cultured. I want you to be wise. I want you to be smart. I want you to have seen a lot of things. I want you to have learned a lot of things. And then it's totally the teach as you go mentality of just like, hey, every 2 minutes, I'm like, hey, did you see that? Did you catch that? Did you notice that? So it's little stuff like that where you get those opportunities if you're constantly kind of like, they're around you as like a protege or an apprentice, you know what I mean, in life. Yeah. And so if we're going to the bank, I'm talking about it. If we're going to the grocery store, I'm talking about it. And so we try to be an open book with that stuff, because that stuff catches up over time, Yeah.
And it almost takes the pressure off too when I think about it.
Yeah.
Of
I think a lot of parents
to create.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents think like, let's sit down and I'm going to talk about something for an hour.
Yep.
Most of life with the kids is teaching them something in like 2 minutes that just like they observed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And there is the sit down conversations, and there, you have family meetings and all that stuff. But yeah, it's like you can actually do so much with so little if you're just constantly kind of opening your mouth as you go. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And answering their questions.
I think just even in the context of our company, when we think about like, okay, there's a message that we want to make sure that we communicate to the team. It's not just, okay, we're going to share this on Fridays, all hands. We're going to share it at Fridays, all hands.
And you're going to see it on Monday.
We're going to see it on
Monday.
Check
it on Tuesday.
It's going to be on the scorecard that we review every week. It's going to be a line item in the manager's one-on-one with them. It's this idea of cascading communication and it needing to happen over and over and over again. This idea of like the sex talk being this one isolated thing. I've heard a lot of people kind of push back about that against that now, and how it needs to be multiple conversations. But that's so much. I mean, when it comes to finances, when it comes to how you think about work, and I think setting yourself up to do that. Taking that first step of saying, I'm going to make the decision, the choice to integrate my kids into all
100%.
facets of my life.
Yeah. It's huge. Yeah. And you know, and there's, I feel like this is one of the greatest life hacks as a dad. It's so simple and it's kind of this, but even like a specific version of it is I always say, I never go on an errand without one kid. And so it's like if I'm going to Home Depot, if I'm going to the post office, and there's a couple of blessings there. One, it's actually like a mini date. So I'm getting connection with them that I'm not feeling guilty for not building into my week. Because sometimes I will take them to a coffee shop, we play a card game, whatever. But sometimes I'm really busy. So sometimes it's like if I'm constantly trying to separate them out from my life and the adult stuff, then I miss out on so much more hang time with them.
Yeah.
So it's actually like good hang time. You know, I let them get a little sucker. They start loving it so much that they start arguing about who gets to come, you know? And then on top of that, then you get to teach the life lessons while you're there.
Yeah.
Then you get to communicate. So it's like that. I would say the errand one is a really fun, easy life hack. And then I didn't add any more time in my week. I took them 5 times 1 week and it's like, I didn't add 1 more minute of things in my schedule.
I love that. So you talk about going back to connecting family to sports, the correlation of team and family there, and you mentioned 5 elements of a team that families should also have.
Oh, don't put me on the spot. You're going to read them, right?
I'm going to read them. So you've got
those memorized.
And you've touched on some of them already. Every team has a strong identity.
Yes.
Every team has healthy communication.
Yes.
And you mentioned proactive, not reactive, and we see that in coaches. Every team has culture and rituals.
Yeah.
Every team has a coach, not a babysitter. You mentioned that earlier. And every healthy team has a mission and vision. So one of these that I want to press in on is this every team has culture and rituals.
That one's big. Yeah.
I took lots of notes on a variety of rituals that you and Jeremy have incorporated in your family.
Yeah.
I've probably been I've probably went a little overboard. If you were to ask my wife, like coming out of that event, I'm like, we're gonna have a ritual for everything.
Yes, it's hard.
So how do you talk us through how you think about rituals, maybe even the process for like how you integrate one in.
Well, the first part is it's funny. You're exactly like me. I'm like, when I get excited about something, I just go crazy. The first tip I tell people once they realize that doesn't work super well is add one at a time and don't add another one until you can do that first one with your eyes closed, meaning like your body's doing it without even your mind doing it. Meaning, Sabbath for us is a very large one. That's a huge one. But like, it was really, that took us like 2 years to develop. Like that felt like a ritual where it was very difficult to just like feel good, feel like we're all resting. Like, I talk about that, like, and we found that that's actually common. Most people expect it to be magical and amazing. It's like, that's a very difficult practice to build in, but it is absolutely to the place now of like, I could do it with our eyes closed, like 7 years in, 8 years in, it's just, everyone expects it. Friday night, we know the energy, like, all that stuff. So I would say, and there's really small ones too. You mentioned one, the breakfast benediction in the morning, like a little prayer we do that takes 15 seconds. Same thing. That's so easy. That's so quick. Once we could do it with our eyes closed, literally or figuratively. But I would say, so that's the first tip is these things are really big and huge and you need to do them as a team, but you have 60 years. So like, don't feel like it's add 1 million at a time, literally, because it actually is better for you, the DNA of your family to be more, James Clear talks about this with his habit stuff, Atomic Habits. Like, it's actually way better to do a couple very consistently than like try to do 10 not consistently. They won't form you. If you don't do something habitually, it won't form you. It won't actually change your heart. It won't change your mind. So you really got to get it consistently. That's the biggest key. Then I would say reverse engineer them. So what I mean by that is think about the reason I love this one so much is it's so different for every family. Like some families are wildly extroverted, some are wildly introverted, some are wildly sport people, some are super bookish. I don't know, like you can go on and just the DNA, some are comedic, some are game night people. But whatever it is, like reverse engineer your family. So what I mean by that is, okay, what's your family's DNA? What do you kind of like? What's kind of the direction you're going with your mission of just like, why does God kind of put you guys together? And then what you want to do is cultures and rituals, the whole point of them is just to undergird all of that. The whole point of them is just to kind of create bond, glue. So when you think about a good company, what's the, I forget who the business leader is, but Culture eats what for breakfast?
Strategy for breakfast.
Yeah, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so that's a great example too of like, that's true. That's true. Like strategy is actually an amazing thing. I'm a strategy guy, but culture at the end of the day just wins. Now here's what I would say. Every family has a culture, whether you realize it or not. You have a culture, meaning that's just like the spirit, the DNA, the vibe of your family, the vibe, right? Of like how fast paced you go, what your home feels like. Is it a lighthearted family? Are you guys really mean to each other all the time? Are you guys all sarcastic? Are you quick to judge? Like, just, you have a culture, you have habits that kind of like are, formed over time that like define the family. Again, using a Warriors example, just they're my favorite, so I can use them a lot. Their culture is very obvious. Massively fun, massively fast. They literally play faster than any other NBA team. They have more possessions than any other NBA team. And they are crazy selfless. So you can just see their culture like play out on the floor. Now, I'm sure it's exactly what it's like behind closed doors, except for, Draymond punching Jordan Poole, if you saw that. But every team has conflict too. So I would say like, this is, I think, the funnest one is what I'm trying to say. Like, this should not feel like a burden, but it's really important. Culture and ritual is like, pull out the whiteboard and just like experiment, like, And so we're 10 years into this methodology or this philosophy, and we still are constantly trying to be like, okay, what's a new one? What are we tweaking? What are we messing with? Especially because kids' ages. So we just added probably this last month, game night on Sunday nights. And that has been so fun. We tried that earlier and it just bombed because like the kids were so young. Like they're not, they could care, like we tried, but then like they're not sticking with it. They weren't invested. But now our kids are 8 and 6 and 4, and Lucy kind of just piddles around or plays or does whatever she does. But the oldest kids, like we play now, like Sunday night, like Uno or this game, and Taco. What's the one we're loving? Taco, cat, goat, cheese, of pizza. Have you played that one? That's a fun one. It's fun. It's a really fun, fast-paced card game for little kids. So if you look that one up, we're super into Sorry and all that stuff. So. Yeah, it's like, and what that does is it's not for me, it's not really about the games, right? It's about the culture of what game night on Sunday night does over 15 years. So that's what those ones mean, and they're really, really important, but they should be really fun to try to experiment with them.
I love that you're iterating, you are continuing to reiterate the importance of this is a long game
100%.
That we're playing.
Yeah.
And when you think about it in the context of we've got 60 years to do this, even that is like, oh man, like so many people think of it as, no, we have 18 years. To do this.
Yes, exactly.
But when you have a longer view of family and you start to think about, and we're going to dive into that.
It's almost like thinking, I think, excuse me, I think a lot of people think of the metaphor I'd use is they think of 0 to 18 as building the whole house. And then like giving it, and then the house is done. When I would say 0 to 18 is building the foundation, and then 18 to 5 more generations is building the house. So I think that's a very different picture.
Yes. So you also talk about how every healthy team has a mission and a vision. And this one's personally really compelling to me. I've seen it play out in our business, the importance of a rallying cry, having this thing that everybody is fighting for. And as Lisa and I are trying to figure out what is that for us, I'm really personally passionate about foster care. She's really passionate about caring for somebody as an individual, and so a lot of the way she loves people, it looks like crafts or things that take a lot of time for her to invest in to show that person that she cares deeply for them. So we love people differently. I'm a words of affirmation person. She's much more like tough love, like tell you what nobody else is going to tell you kind of thing. And so there's been this like, okay, what thinking it's a little crippling, I guess, in thinking like, what's the mission of the Carberry family? Yes. What did that look like for you all? You obviously have this really well articulated mission now, and you're talking.
Took
about
like 3 years, by the way. So I would say yes, it is crippling, and so don't see it as that. I say again, see it as a journey and an experiment, and something you're just kind of putting in pencil over a couple of years in a process of discovery. Right? You just need enough. You just need enough at any given time to be able to go. That's all you're looking for. And then once that stops letting you go, then you iterate or change or adapt. So I would say even with you talking, and your kid's super young. And so it's like, that is such a discovery process where you won't know totally until I think the Lord reveals more of a mission to a family as the kids get older, because the kids are so integral to the mission. They're not just leech suckers, they're like actually contributors to the mission. And so until you know what their role is on the team, then you might not even be able to know your full mission. But think about it like an umbrella. Like you want it to be concrete enough that you can attack it, you can go after it, but you want it to be big enough that everyone can fit. So it's never, I think one of the couple mistakes people make is one, they go way too lofty, way too far, and it's like crippling. Or the second mistake I've seen a lot of people make is the dad's mission is too conflated with the family's mission, right? Now the dad definitely, I think, is a huge part of setting the vision. But what I mean by that is like, go bigger. So like you did a perfect example with how you were talking where, foster care for you, care for her is what you used, in different ways. But I think you were basically articulated in that, like your guys' umbrella is like care, right? And it might play out different ways, but like care is actually the mission. And so that should, when it's bigger, it's exciting because then it's like, oh, we all fit.
Yeah.
And so we have to always, and some stuff won't fit. We'll get asked to do things that doesn't fit under that, and so we'll say no. But, and that's actually a really big reason why I actually tell people they should try to find and go on that discovery process, is it's the best funnel and filter for decisions. When your family, every family is going to be asked to do more than they can. We just always are constantly feeling pressure from society, friends, culture, church, and literally on our actual schedule being asked to do more than we can. Can you do this? Can you do this? Oops, I just hit the low button on my chair and I just sunk real deep. And so when that happens, I would say, you have to have a filter process. How are you filtering decisions? Is it like just, it sounds good, right? For us, it's not. For us, it took us a couple years, but we have a pretty articulated vision where, that's very large. We would literally say our mission is just to bring Jesus' reign on Maui as it is in heaven. So that's where we live. And it's just kind of a little play on words with Jesus' prayer in Matthew 5 or in other places of the Gospels. So that actually, like, everything fits under that to some degree. But then we say that, but through these 8 pillars that we think are very distinct to our DNA. And so we just kind of like 8 quick buzzwords, table, family as a team, health, rhythms, and a couple more, and so it's just like, that's a really easy, like we don't feel stuffy by that, right? It's just kind of like, okay, but it's articulated enough where we know what we're doing. We know what we're doing, and we know what we're going to say no to, right? Like that's not us over there. Or that's not who we are. So that's a constant phrase your family should be saying is, that's not who we are. Yeah, that's a very good phrase a family should be saying. But to do that, you need to know who you are. Yep. So yeah, I would say don't feel crippled by it. See it as like a really like wet paint, like, let's just mess around. And we literally did. We literally just like threw ideas on the whiteboard for like a year. And then we literally would be like, laugh at like, oh, that one's not us. Like that's not who we are. We want to be that. That's not who we are, and we never will be. So it's like, funny stuff like that. So I would say, but yeah, the discovery process is huge. You mentioned, waiting for JJ to get a little bit older, and God will likely crystallize further as he gets older. And you talked about this idea of, kids not. I think so often in our culture, we look at kids as liabilities, things that need to be protected, things that need, and the way you guys talk about it at family teams, it's, kids are actually assets on your team. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, you can even see it back to our original, kind of going full circle with the conversation about the Industrial Revolution and what's changed. The reason the fertility rates are dropping to now a very problematic level, which if anyone's familiar with like the macro, not economics, the macro kind of data on birth fertility rates, we actually are in a very problematic time where we are dropping below, I think it's like you have to be above 2.1, I think, without like being able to replenish the population, which means like we are going to like start shrinking, which is very fascinating. People like South Korea, Japan, China, are about 15, 20 years ahead of us on this trend. And so they're already like in mad crisis mode where they're paying people to have kids because it's actually affecting, because what happens is you have so many old people, no young people, there's no one to take care of the old people. It's that simple. There's a lot more problems to it than that, but it is a very large crisis. And so then it just burdens the state, right, with massive debt. It's a fascinating thing. I find it very interesting because there's zero, culture really pushes that narrative of kids and they're bad and have one and it's bad for the earth and overpopulation. If you actually read the data, there's not one shred of evidence. All the evidence literally supports the opposite. Like we're actually in crisis mode. We need to have more kids. Now on the micro, have however many kids you want to have. I'm not saying that. But on the macro, it's crisis mode. Now, what's interesting is I think that's all based on the fact that we see kids as liabilities. We see them as leech suckers of just like they're taking all of our money, taking all of our resources, they're making our life harder, more pressure, we got to feed them, we got to make more money, blah, blah, blah. Now, to some degree, that is true. We're in like a bad prison kind of rat race that we've created. But you go to 1700s, 1800s, the reason they had 12 kids is not because
of everything I just said. It's actually because they saw kids as assets. They were actually having more kids for the exact opposite reason. They were actually like, we are drowning in work. We are drowning at the farm. We are drowning in the blacksmith company. We need more employees. So they literally had more children. So like, that's a fascinating juxtaposition. I think there's some problematic stuff to that too, child labor, all that stuff, right? But that's a fascinating juxtaposition that they literally had those big of families because they needed the children. They literally saw that. They literally believed that. Not just because they thought it was spiritual or Christian. They were, literally, that most people had it because they just literally needed farm hands.
Yeah.
I find that deeply interesting. And so, yeah, we are certainly in that world. And so that feels like something you have to swim upstream on big to believe is like, no, kids are not drain on the resources, right? Kids are actually team members. God wants to give your family to expand the vision, expand the team, and expand the reign and rule of God in the kingdom of God through your family. And like, that's just such a different way to think about it. But it's huge. It's huge to think about it that way.
I want to talk about rhythms and goals. So you've mentioned rhythms, even
a lot. Yeah, it's a favorite word of mine. It's a buzzword of mine.
Yeah, it's a tenet in your, it's a pillar in your in how you describe your family. So talk to us about the difference and kind of how those two things play together, rhythms and goals.
Yeah, so they're similar but different, and in the Western culture, we're obsessed with goals, right? But goals are very linear. It's very much like I set one, I do one or don't do one, and then I achieve it or don't achieve it, and then I'm done, right? It's very like, it doesn't do any, it's kind of just like flimsy. But a rhythm is similar, but better. And so in another word you can swap for that is habit, right? Like and habits or rhythms, they're not just about achievement, they're about formation. So goals are about achieving something in a linear society where you feel good about the metric of the reward, when a rhythm or a habit is actually about forming yourself into a particular type of person that does those things that gets the goals, right? So it's just a little bit more, it feels more full. And I try to encourage people, if you do rhythms, goals get thrown in. If you do goals, then you won't be formed very deeply. So it's kind of like you can get one without the other, but you can't get the other one without the one. So I would say, think about, and again, Atomic Habits is a great book on this in a secular perspective, but on rhythms and habits of like, it's not just about rhythms and habits, but it's about rhythms and habits because they deeply form you into who you're being. They form you for who you are. They become you become what you do. And so I think there's a lot of that, and the scriptures completely support that with like, we're meant to become like Jesus. And the only way you become like Jesus is by acting like Jesus, and not acting like Jesus in a goal-oriented way of I do this, but actually trying to step into his pace, step into his rhythms, and step into the way of life. It's cyclical and it's way deeper, where you actually become a certain type of person who does a certain type of thing, not just does a certain type of thing.
Are rhythms and rituals the same thing?
I would say so, yeah, very similar. The only difference I would say maybe is I like to think about them a little differently, where I would say ritual is a little less spiritual. Like I feel like a ritual could be, tying your shoe or something like that, right? But I usually mean it in the rhythm way, which is a more elevated kind of something that's actually, you're doing it to form you.
What would be an example of a rhythm that you
I would say like whether it's prayers in the morning, Sabbath every week, whether it's a yearly family summit, because I think rhythms come in all different sizes. So the ones I usually try to think them through is daily, weekly, yearly. And so you need to have all of those. You need to have something that forms you in a daily way. It should be something very small, but it shapes your trajectory. Weekly kind of shape, bigger, but shapes your week. And then yearly, like the tentpole events for your life. So, a marriage would be that one, but that's only one time. But like a family summit, or like, think about it like a business. They have the offsites and the culture, and those are yearly is usually about shaping culture, right? It's usually about like the vision and the culture. We're going this way next year. Here's where our metrics are. Here's where we were last year. Here's what we did. Celebrate. Let's reflect. Blah blah blah. And so you have to think about like the point of all those too.
Yeah, you talk about rhythm tools being a 7-day calendar, Sabbath, and the weekly family meeting. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, those are strong tools where I think if a family, there's a lot of different things good families can do. If a family is doing a genuinely healthy, like life-giving Sabbath and doing a once a week family meeting, which, you got to have, I would say, above toddlers at least. So, elementary kids or older, man, those two are enough to take you far of just like health. It's crazy what those two are like the supercharged ones, meaning a day of rest where it's your family identity day. Because every other day, someone else is setting the agenda. Your school is, your work is, your friends are, whatever. Can you just have one day for your family where it's for you guys, right? For your enjoyment, for your pleasure, for your fun, not for some like ridiculous, religious, stuffy like observation, but more about a day that shapes you. So like, yeah, every Friday night to Saturday night is the Bethke Sabbath. And at this point it is just I usually cook a crazy meal. I'll buzz, and I try to, if it needs to be paper plates and pizza, you can do that. But we're at the point now where it's actually like, that's where I try to elevate it the most. And it's really fun because I like that. So I'm busting out the pizza oven on Friday night. I'm busting out the smoker on Friday night, like just fun, epic, good eats, good drinks. And then we usually will go hang outside or light a fire outside in the backyard. Saturday, we do live in Hawaii, so almost every Saturday we go to the beach because that just feels so fun and life-giving. Go to the park if you want to. I remember when we lived in Washington, that's what we did a lot. Just like, man, we wanted to feel life-giving. Go home, take a nap, wake up, and then we end our Sabbath with family movie night. So instead of it just being like, hey, let's all watch screens all the time and individual and in our rooms, we have a really curated experience where Saturday night is like family movie night. So it's like, again, elevated connection, we just watched Three Ninjas. Do you remember those movies?
Yeah, I love those
freaking
movies.
iconic. So I showed the kids those because I try to do a lot of nostalgia movies with them with like Rookie of the Year and some of my favorite ones and all that. But man, this one hit different for them. Like they are obsessed now. And so for 3 weeks, the last 3 weeks since we've watched it, 2 weeks ago, sorry, all the inside jokes, all the lines, and it's like, that's what I want movie night to be. That's culture, right? It's not just us being like consumer vehicles, but it's like we're all doing the lines now. And the inside, the funniest one is there's this scene where one of the little kidnapper guys, Tum Tum's hiding underneath the bunk bed, and the kid and the guy sits on the bunk bed, and you can see that the kid's right above him, but he doesn't see him. And he's like, where are those little boogers? If I was a booger, where would I hide? And the kids have just literally said that like 20 times a day for the last 2 weeks. They're like, if I was a little booger, where would I hide during hide and seek? And it's just like hilarious and fun. I'm like, man, I actually love that.
Yeah.
That it's kind of these like family movie nights are becoming these cultural points, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, that's a really good example.
I think I heard Jeremy actually talk about it on the Family Teams podcast after the event. He talked about this idea that we don't need to be a slave to whatever new media Netflix decides to produce next week, but we have this, decades
of stories,
and media that captured our hearts as kids.
And it's like so fun to like pass it on.
Yes. And so this idea of like Three Ninjas, Rookie of the Year, Little
Big League. Yes, we've spent like, I would probably say the last 6 months of our movie night has, sometimes we'll watch the new ones, the kids ones, the Pixar, the ones that just came out. The last 6 months though, we've had a run of just that, where it's like my movies. We did 9 weeks in a row, and it was like the most epic buildup ever of Star Wars. I feel like they were finally ready, and that the same thing, man. That one hit so. They're obsessed. They dressed as it for Halloween. All the lines, all the zingers, and that took 3 months, or 2 months or whatever to watch through all those. We've probably watched. There's some we're skipping because I think they're not quite ready with how dark, they're a little darker. But most of the Marvel we've watched, same thing. Like we've gone like probably 15 deep on those, and it's just like. And because I'm a Marvel guy, so I've already watched all those. I'm pretty obsessed. I love Marvel. I've seen all of them in theaters. What else? Rookie of the Year. There's like 5 baseball ones when I was a kid that I loved. Rookie of the Year, Little Big League, Angels of the Outfield, Sandlot.
You and I were the same person.
Yeah, and like all these movies. And it's like, man, bringing out the nostalgia movies is so epic. Now there's a hilarious tip for parents, by the way. There's some nostalgia movies, like Sandlot's an example. I'm like, I don't remember actually how much they swear in this movie and all that. So be careful of that. But man, like, yes, it's a perfect example of, it is a massively elevated experience with that, because then it's just hilarious and awesome and fun, and you're using the one-liners you used as a kid with your kids, and
Yeah. So my thinking around Sabbath, and I think a lot of people think about Sabbath this way. That it's just this very restrictive thing.
Totally.
And to hear you and Jeremy talk about it at the event, it's not a rule, but a rhythm. You talk about making Sabbath enjoyable, sustainable, meaningful. I think you related it like a mini Christmas.
Yes. That's the perfect example for that. Real quick, can we talk about that? Yeah, I think the mini Christmas is the perfect metaphor, and here's why. Because all of your angst or questions or whatever can be answered by asking, what would I do on Christmas? It's the same thing. So, and not to get nerdy, but literally the word for holiday comes from the phrase holy days, which are literally like Jewish feasts and biblical holidays. So it's like we literally have shaped our holidays That word comes from that, like these holy days, these days that are set apart for meaning, right? And Sabbath is a mini version of that because you're doing it 52 times a year, not just one time a year. But that's the best question to ask, like, can I or can't I? Or any questions you have for Sabbath, you can ask by, well, what do I do on Christmas? Okay, so here's one. When you have a really, really bad Christmas where uncle gets drunk and everyone's grumpy and your family fights, do you cancel next year's Christmas? No. Well, why do you do that on Sabbath? You had a really bad Sabbath. All the kids were fighting. They were all arguing. It wasn't restful at all. Well, do you cancel next week? No. You just say, that was a really bad Sabbath. We need to do better next year. Okay. Is Christmas special in any way? Yes. Do people maybe sometimes buy special plates for Christmas? Yes. Do they sometimes maybe make a special meal on Christmas? Yes. Do they maybe sometimes go do something after Christmas dinner that's kind of fun, like go to a movie or light a fire in the backyard? Yes. Like it just, you should do that on Sabbath. Like it's such a perfect metaphor for because what is Christmas? It's a set apart day for family in the West, for like enjoyment, meaning, pleasure, and stopping. Think how sacrilegious it is to work on Christmas. It's so sacrilegious, right? Like everyone gets it off, and if you have it, then it's just the bummer and all these different types of things. So like why can't we just do that once a week?
Yeah. You talk about it, you or Jeremy, I can't remember which one, talked about it like pleasure stacking.
Exactly. Yeah.
And literally,
I talked about that, and I got that from John Tyson. Yeah.
And so this idea of just stacking all of the pleasures.
Yes. It's not a day of like stuffiness or restrictiveness or anything like that, but it's actually a day of like the way you can kind of gamify it is through the funny concept of pleasure stacking, which it's like, think about, every hour and a half, try to give yourself a new pleasure. Or another way to make that day really enjoyable is hold stuff for just that day. So it's like, oh man, I really want pie on Tuesday. Well, now I'm going to save it for Sabbath. I really want ice cream. I'll save it for Sabbath. Man, here's a funny one for me. I really love Yellowstone, the show.
Yes.
I love Yellowstone. You guys love Yellowstone? It's freaking amazing. Love Yellowstone. I think it actually is one of the best shows in film or movies, actually showing a strong family team. Now it's a dark, mafia, sinful family team, but it has so much undergirding of a family team, protecting the ranch, the legacy, the name, but without all the sin and darkness. But for me, I save Yellowstone for Sabbath.
Yeah.
So like I almost always watch it in bed on my phone, like 10 p.m. after we've all gone to bed. Everyone's gone to bed because no one else wants to watch.
Have you figured out how to watch season 5? I can't figure out how to watch it.
So we have Hulu Live, and I've been watching it through there.
Okay.
So I get like the TV, and I record it because after a day it disappears. But if I record it, it stays.
Got it.
Because I know it's super.
I was like, I signed up for
so
Paramount
weird,
Plus.
What network is? Yeah. They're so weird with what network it's on and where it's at, and I don't know what's going on with them. But
1883 and now 1923.
Yes, dude, you're super into it too. I love that. I'm stoked. But it is interesting too because I just love that show. But that's a perfect example. So I save it, you know what I mean? And then what happens is, man, I just am giddy on Friday because I'm like, I get to watch Yellowstone. So it's like a really little fun life hack for me to make that day just like fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a new word that I learned from this event. How does Shabbat fit into Sabbath?
Yes, so that word is basically just the Hebrew word that they use for Sabbath, but the word literally means cease. And so for us, we do use that word just because we kind of lean into a lot more of that ancient spirit. And specifically, we do our Sabbath or Shabbat Friday night to Saturday night, which is very Jewish, And one thing I would encourage folks is you don't have to do it whenever you want. Pick a day, pick a time, just make it a day, carve it out, do what you need to do. But there is an argument to be made that starting with, not necessarily Friday night, but for us, I do think that works really well, but starting with night is actually really helpful. Early on when we were trying to practice Sabbath, we did start it with a day, and it can actually be magical. Wake up, cook, pancakes and breakfast and make it fun. But it just still didn't seem like it had that kickoff spirit. There's something about a nighttime dinner spirit that I think is a perfect kickoff energy. Now, again, if you can't with your job, firefighter, cop, whatever, do what you need to do. But just a little nugget there I would encourage people with is, first of all, it's scriptural. So when God in Genesis creates day and night, it actually begins with night. So the Jewish calendar begins the day with night, which is interesting. It says that he created the first, day one, and there was night, and then there was morning, the first day. There was night, and there was morning the second. So he's actually starting with the night, not the day. And I find that interesting that he actually starts with the time that we should be resting. And I think it just does something. It just kind of like your work day's done. It ushers in this rest. It ushers it in better, and then you go to bed. It's kind of like a kickoff and then go to bed. So, and then I think just something about dinner, like I think our culture does understand that. Like we do birthday parties and dinner, like usually at dinner, there's something about that spirit. So it's just totally a practical thing. I'm not saying it's a legality thing at all, but I would do, and we stole that just because you go to Israel and everyone is starting Shabbat Friday night.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said with that. But yeah, it's basically just the Jewish word for Sabbath, but it literally means cease. And so we'll light a candle for our Shabbat and we'll say, hey guys, I ask the same question every week. What does Shabbat mean? They'll say rest and party. That's our 2 words, but just cease and celebrate, basically, which come from the scripture. And yeah, it's just a way to kind of kick off.
And it's also a mechanism that I've heard Jeremy talk about to include older generations.
100%. So yeah, so we kick off with a dinner, and that dinner is absolutely the dinner where we try to integrate older generations. So like for us, Alyssa's parents live with us on our property. So they come over every Friday night, and it's a very rhythmic, great way to connect with them, stay around with them. And then, I kind of have this philosophy on Shabbat where I kind of put them on the hot seats. So it's like or the honor seats. So again, we just did it just last Friday before we left to come here. We had a family friend in town with him and his wife and 2 kids. So it was like a big Shabbat. We had 11 people at the table. We had Alyssa's parents, and it was fun, like, because they're really close. And so, and so they were totally, I was like, guys, we're about to do 3 things that you have no idea. I'm about to do this. I'm about to sing a song, I'm about to light a candle. And they loved it. The kids I was like, just try to keep up, pound the table, do whatever you want to do, make a lot of noise. And it was just fun. And then I got to show them, like I just said, I told them, I was like, hey guys, on Friday nights, we like to just ask their name, we call them Mimi and Papa in the family, Grandma and Grandpa. We like to ask them questions about their childhood. It's a fun little habit we do, so that again, over 18 years, think about how much stories they've shared with the kids to connect the generations, right? And so and I just tell the kids, like, bring any question you want. And it's so fun because it does this thing where toddlers can be like crazy and bouncing off the wall, but if you can get someone to start telling a story, they're locked. They're locked. They're in. It's so fascinating how their energy changes, and they don't want to leave the table and then, tell us another one. It's so fascinating what it does to like a toddler demeanor. And it happened again this last week. I think the 3 questions they asked, which filled up like 45 minutes, which is like 10 hours, by the way, with toddlers. Like that's such a long dinner. Seriously. Normal dinners for us are like 15 minutes. I'll read the scripture, we'll eat, I'll say something. But 45 minutes, that's so long. And so, but it was only took 3 questions, I think, to get that long. And I think it was the first one was, because we just had Thanksgiving, we said, do you have any Thanksgiving memories as a kid? And that was really fun. And then we asked, one of the kids asked, can you think of any pranks you ever pulled on a kid or as a kid? So that was hilarious. We're just laughing and, and so it's like this stuff fun like that. And then it really honors the grandparents. They don't have to prep for it, but they feel super honored because they're like on this seat of honor and storytelling and every single week. And so building that habit has been really fun.
Yeah. And again, it goes back on that idea of, instead of thinking about, I've heard people recently talk about like, we should do a video interview with one of our grandparents and document it so that it's,
which is an epic idea, by the way.
Which is a great idea. But what I love so much more
That's
about
a high
this,
bar.
it is it's rhythmic and it's regular, and the compounding effect, like you said, of your kids hearing your parents' stories
And the funniest part is, now that our kids are getting a little older, is I know I hit the bullseye of this working when my oldest, who's only 8 now, will start to like giggle thinking about past stories from the grandparents, and do that thing with like the elbow of like, Papa, tell him this one, tell like ones that she knows already.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, that hit, we're doing it right, when like that's kind of happening.
Yes, I love that. So you talk about there being 2 things that determine a family's success: repair and getting back on track.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So Jeremy talked about that at the family teams weekend, and that comes from our good buddy of ours, Josh Straub. So if you know him, or you'll meet him in Integrated, he's amazing. PhD psychologist, specifically on family, marriage, child. Him and his wife both are, does incredible work on it. And he told us about this from some other research that he's researched and found from some other psychologists that basically have data to support this. But some of the most important thing a parent can do to, when you're like messing up, or if there's conflict with a kid or whatever, is I think I'm trying to remember the stat. I swear it's 3 out of 5, where what he means is which that's so deeply encouraging. Like with every little moment with your kid of like, man, maybe I got angry with them, maybe I got grumpy with them, but then I was like, but then the next conversation when we had conflict, I did it right or whatever. You only have to get 3 out of 5 of those right? Which, by the way, that's 60%. That's a D- or a failing grade in school. Okay, that's really bad. But if you get 3 out of 5 of those little moments right of like not raising your voice, not whatever, you are like almost guaranteed like childhood health, mentally, emotionally, psychology. That's like wildly encouraging to hear because most people think 90%, 95, or if I just, now again, you want 0. We don't want any of those moments. They're and you want to, and then he goes, and then what he says though, this is the key. So it's, if you get 3 out of 5 of those right, but when you mess up on the 2 out of the 5, you repair them. Then you're just like the health is through the roof of a parent-kid relationship by the time they graduate high school. And so repair is really, really huge. And because if you don't repair, those fester, and so it's like, you don't need to get them all right. You just need to repair the ones that weren't right.
Yeah.
And so he talks about that, and that's simple, but it's literally just like, addressing the kid, repenting. Like a parent who repents is one of the most powerful parents in the world. Meaning like genuine repentance. Like go to your kid, genuinely apologize, say specifically what you're apologizing for, ask for forgiveness, and repair it, right? And say you'll do better next time and try better next time. And it's crazy how that actually works and softens. And again, going full circle again, back to the conversation we had about peer attachment and child attachment to their parent. That is one of the key things right there that you stay attached with is when you're constantly repairing and repenting.
So I want to. You've mentioned obviously we have a blood bond over Yellowstone.
Yes.
And all of the
So
properties
good.
around.
It's the only
that.
show I love, by the way. I don't watch any other show, but I love Yellowstone.
But when you watch it, it's intense.
I want to move to Montana.
It is a.
It's intense.
There's a lot of sin.
Yes.
A lot of sin
100%.
happening in that show. You talk about Marvel. How do you think about media exposure to media for your kids?
Yeah.
What's the line that you and Alyssa have chosen to draw?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first of all, my kids don't watch Yellowstone. And yeah, me and Alyssa even have different personal boundaries. Like she certainly could not watch Yellowstone. She's super sensitive. I'm really, and everyone has their own, I think it's a little bit of Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12. Like you kind of have to have your own judgment between you and the Lord. Obviously still obedient to scripture because I don't think there's some stuff that's right at all. But yeah, so I have my own personal kind of values on I can't do almost anything sexual on shows. Like it's just too much for me. It's weird. I don't like it. I think it's dark. But I honestly could take probably as much violence as it just doesn't. Because to me, I'm like, that's ketchup.
Yeah.
Like that's not real. That's not real.
Yeah.
So but some people can't. Like Alyssa, that gets in her mind and gives her nightmares. I don't know. So that's one part of it. So I also think it translates to kids. By the way, like little kid shows, you still have to be sensitive to like each kid. I don't think it's just like a one size fits all. You need to be sensitive to your kid's heart. What shapes your kid's heart? What is your kid extra attuned to? What's your kid's fears? Stuff like that. But in general, I would say our rules are with that is, we try to, I don't want to shelter my kids, but I also don't want them to be like exposed to stuff too early. And so I think I don't know, we're just kind of mindful of like, okay, did that one barely cross the line? Well, then I think the biggest thing though is conversations with your kids. I think one of the worst things, and this was my childhood, one of the worst things that can happen is you're watching a lot of bad stuff and then no one's talking to you about it. When I honestly don't even think, like there's a really good book, Whole Brain Child, I believe. Whole Brain, yeah, I think that. It's a blue cover, has like a silhouette of a kid's head, if anyone's on Amazon right now looking for it. The very first chapter opens up. The whole book's about childhood trauma, and it's very fascinating. And the book opens up with a car accident, right? And this parent and this kid driving by the car accident, and this clinical psychologist says they found with research and actually like reproducing this, that one of the worst things the parent can do for that kid driving by a car accident is cover their eyes. Kind of don't look. And what he says is it's actually the spirit of anxiety that parent has about the kid seeing that is actually then imputed to that kid. So now the kid has the spirit of anxiety around anything traumatic. And I find, and the whole book is about like just deeply unpacks this. There it is right there. Did I not nail it with the picture in my head? But that's fascinating that you actually impute the anxiety. So I think there's a couple things there. One, we're also very careful that like there is some stuff that we're like, oh, don't see that. We don't want you to see that. Don't look at that or whatever. But you have to be careful with like imputing the spirit of anxiety on the kid rather than like, hey, you should be coming from a peace. You should be a non-anxious presence with how you talk about things of, oh, hey, let's talk about what had just happened in that movie, or let's just talk about, what do you think? Do you think that's weird? Let's talk about the scriptures. It's almost like about your demeanor. So that's the first one. And then second, there's like obviously the deeper, darker stuff, pornography, stuff like that. I do think parents need to be speaking about to their kids earlier than they think with that stuff. The average age of exposure to kids now is 8 years old, which means that's the average. So some kids are going to see it at 6, some kids are going to see it at 11. You need to be mindful of that. It's not 13, it's not 15. So be mindful of that. There's really good books on that. On what's the one? I think it's called like Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. Is that the right one? That's a strong book on like, that's like a little kid book. That's like, the little, you flip picture book, stuff like that. That's a great book for like that we read to our kids, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, to just constantly give them language and frameworks on good pictures, bad pictures, what to do when they see bad pictures, what those look like, good touches, bad touches, all that type of stuff. Justin Holcomb is a PhD children's author as well, with different books on like bodies and touches, and that's another great one. So that kind of, we're diverting from just like media consumption to those ones, but that's a helpful conversation. On the pure, just like Netflix, Disney, you just have to be careful. Like, there's some stuff that we're like, hey, like, I do think Netflix and Disney Plus are getting darker, just to, go straight to the big guys. And so we're very careful on like, hey, we don't just let you just like turn that on and flip around.
Yeah.
Because that is like a dark space now. So we definitely curate those spaces, look up stuff, use parent guides and all that. Our absolute favorite show, times a million, is Bluey. Bluey's insane. I love Bluey. Give it a shout out for any teams. So they can watch that as much as they want. But yeah, so I don't know if that's helps to kind of what you're asking, but it's just, you definitely have to have a framework for it.
Yeah. So you mentioned in the video with 35 million views, it was in your poem. You mentioned, addiction to pornography.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not just like putting you on blast.
No, totally.
It's 35 million people
totally.
have seen that and have seen you talk about that. How have you, obviously, it's, you're hard pressed even in the church to find someone to find a man that is not either actively struggling with that or it is in their recent past. Totally. Can you talk to us a little bit about your journey with that and how you, how you have found freedom from that addiction? So
it's probably, I think I talk about in Jesus Great Religion, my book, 12, 13 years old. There was like a random cut up porn magazine cut up in like the back alley. Like, I don't know, someone like cut it up and just like threw it away or something with all this trash pile. And that was like my first exposure to it. And then, it just begins this dark, deep, bad path of just sin. It's such a corrosive, bad sin and what it does to your heart, how it shapes your habits, how it shapes your formation, how it affects marriages later on. So it was probably an 8, 9, 10 year journey. I started walking with the Lord at 19, 20, and that was one of the first things that immediately kind of was awakened in my spirit of like, this is wrong. I don't want to do this, but didn't feel like I had the skill set to say no. So it felt like then there was another probably 3 or 4, probably took me 3 or 4 years after that till I was like a couple years after college to genuinely find freedom and get away from that. It felt almost like this tentacle-like sin. It's just so pervasive and difficult, how it affects you biologically, how it affects if you don't have community, all those different types of things. So it was a long, dark journey. And I think the main thing is what you first have to realize, and what I first had to realize is it's not just about stopping the sin. It's about your heart has to be changed. Your heart affections, meaning like the actual North Star of your heart. What am I trying to get out of this? Right? And I think every guy needs to ask that question, especially if they're really wrestling. They're not just going to porn for the physical release. They're really not. It's either, and there's psychology on this, there's books on this. It's either for the physical release is to some degree an act of soothing, right? Which is an interesting argument from the sense of like, a detached child. I would even say that's probably part of my story of like a detached child in an unhealthy environment who basically was never healthily attached, meaning he never had healthy soothing mechanisms, meaning comfort. Like he never knew how to properly funnel stress, conflict, or difficulty in his life as a child, right? And so then that becomes a very easy vehicle for that. Or like wounds, a lot of guys use it to cover up other wounds. Like it just feels like the thing that can just kind of snap them out of a father wound or something difficult or some place that they, feel deeply wounded in. Or I think it just feels good in the sense of relational. Like there is a part of it, and this is actually where I really struggle with the church's voice on it. Some of the most egregious sins out there are so egregious and powerful because they're close to the truth, right? So like we are created as sexual beings meant to connect with a spouse in a covenantal marriage. And that one flesh, that oneness is a gift from God. And so the lie of that is that you can get all the benefits of that without the covenant, without this like you have to give Keller says it this way, that, porn, or even I think he's actually saying this in the context of just casual sex or hookup culture, is letting your body say something that your life isn't. Your body is saying oneness, but your life is saying like, I don't want to be married to you. I don't know. I don't want to give my life to you. I don't want to sacrifice for you. I don't want to. And so that disconnect is actually deeply harmful to your soul. And so I find that really compelling too, that I think some guys actually, the reason it's also really hard is because there is a part of us that actually we are created for it. We're created for that connection, that release, that intimacy. But porn is like such a distorted, cheap, gross, dark version of that. There's no intimacy. That person is on a screen. They don't know you. You aren't committed to them faithfully in a covenantal marriage. And to some degree, they are also feeding you a lie. They're kind of feeding this weird, bad, dark archetype of what you want a woman to be, who asks nothing of you, does nothing for you, doesn't call you up into manhood, any of these things that a wife genuinely does for your goodness and your growth. So there's like so many elements of it to it. But then there's also a lot of brain research on it, on the practical side of how to get out of it, where I do think there's some guys where, they find the Lord and it's just boom, he breaks those chains, it's freedom. But there's a lot of brain research on, especially with sexual release, that there's one psychologist that he uses the example with our transmitters and kind of synapses, where it's almost like digging a trough, where you dig one dig, okay, that's a shallow hole. You keep digging, meaning like every time you serve that sin, it's actually like kind of digging that hole. But the more you do it, you are digging massive highways. So you just went from like digging one little nugget of dirt to then over 15 years, you just created like I-5 from Washington to California in your brain. So he's like, you don't just break that by like just saying I'm done. You break that by literally demoing the whole highway from Washington to California and redigging a new highway. So not saying that that's going to take 15 years also, but I do think there is a little bit of a parallel there of like, you have to absolutely refire new connections and new synapses from the attachment thing I talked about, from the pleasure thing I talked about, from all these different types of triggers. So I think that should be encouraging and discouraging a little bit. It's discouraging in the sense of it biologically takes a while to break it. The addiction, just like, because it is an addiction, just like it would be cocaine, alcohol, these different types of things. But encouraging in the sense of like, oh, you can do it. Just put one foot in front of the other and constantly choose the right way. And it's another dig. It's another dig. You just went deeper and deeper. And now cement's getting laid. Now the yellow paint's coming out. Now you know what I mean? And so so it's, again, discouraging to some degree, but it's also encouraging. And so, yeah, that was a lot right there, but hopefully that kind of scattered and gave guys, if they're listening, some encouragement there.
Yeah. How does it, for the guys watching this, listening to this, that are in a marriage, wanting to overcome this, what's that look like? How do you, you don't want to just shove it in your wife's face.
Totally. No, I agree with that. There has to be absolute confession and intimacy. I'm definitely not the guy. There is some suggestions out there of like, keep it, I wouldn't say hidden, but like go find someone else to talk to. And I think there's a truth to that to some degree, because you don't want to keep re-traumatizing your wife if you're going to, if it's not a super real repentance, it's just, and you're going to kind of keep doing it over and over again. But to have the power, it's Romans 8 that says the power of the law you break the power of the law from the spirit of the law, right? The spirit of Christ is its own new law. And to find that freedom over the bondage of the old law is by full light. You have to be absolutely in the light. There has to be full intimacy. And so it's that power, the Spirit gives you that power by confession. You can bring something into the light and begin to find new power by confessing. So first it has to be confession. And I wouldn't say detailed, but there has to be there's nothing that they don't know, if that makes sense. And I'm not saying in the detail in like the transcription way, but detailed in the way of like they know how dark it is. They know how long it's been. They know how serious it is. Maybe that's what I would say. So those have to be articulated. Then I don't think, this is what I would say to this. I don't think your wife is your accountability partner. I don't think your wife is your person that's going to help you get you through. She shouldn't carry that. And it shouldn't be her burden or her responsibility. She should pray for you, encourage you, and help you, but she shouldn't be the one that's going to carry that. So then I would say you need to also then go confess and get into the light with some type of mentor, some type of guys group, something at church. There just has to be like this radical, like you have to go all in on do you really want to break this, right? And I think there should be radical steps, because if you only take mediocre steps, then you're only going to get mediocre results, right? And so maybe it might be difficult to live without a phone for 6 months, but maybe you need to. Maybe it might be difficult to not have internet in your house for 6 months, but I think you should, if it's if it's that serious. Because again, think about any other addiction, everyone else thinks that, right? An alcoholic takes the alcohol out of the home, right? There's no cocaine in the home, like all these different types of things. So that is, by the way, why it also is so pervasive in our culture, because the conduit that is the internet is a insanely pervasive thing. That's just like mind blowing. The availability, what we have available in our pockets, and I don't just mean pornographic, but like information is unbelievable for human history. Unbelievable. Then you talk about the fact that like most people were getting married at 17 years old back in the day. Now people are getting married at 35. So that's 20 years of sexual angst. But then there's some also real, just raw like complications to the world in which we live in that should allow us to sympathize. But we also then, if you want to really attack it, you have to attack it.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned something when we were talking before we started recording, Jeff. You said there's no such thing as the one.
Yeah.
That you saying I do is actually what makes them the one.
Totally.
Can you riff on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I just think we've watched too many Disney movies, too many Netflix rom-coms or whatever. We just think, and I don't think it's just a girl's problem, I think guys think it too, that there's like this one out there for us, that there's this one person that God has out there for us. Now, there's a couple problems with that. One, if one person in entire human history has ever married the wrong one, do you realize that they literally messed up all of human history? That's just math. The math checks out. Because if they married the wrong one, then they married someone else's one, and then that person can't marry that one. So it's like the domino effect is absurd. So first of all, logically, that should show you it's ridiculous. Because literally it doesn't exist if one person messed it up, or it couldn't exist. Second of all, most people, it's actually coming from a place of them. It's most people having an ideal in their mind so that their life can be easier, which is really fascinating. It's most people, I have an idea of who I want to marry so that then I don't need to like grow or work, right? It's like, oh yeah, that person will be so perfect for my frailties and weakness and sins and all these things that I don't need to even do anything. They'll just, no. Marriage is actually the opposite. It's meant to actually call you out of yourself into those things. So that's another practical. But on top of that, I think it also sets us up in failure, once you're married. Because once you're married, and conflict happens, then you start wrestling. Like, people like, well, what? Like they, what's the word? Start feeling like disenchanted. Like, oh, did I do something wrong? And so I think, and if you think there's a one, then you will divorce that person. Oh, this person must not be it. And literally that's how people speak. Like they weren't for me. Well, then who is, or what does that mean? So when conflict happens and you realize, okay, there is no one for me, but actually this person is the one because I chose them, then that radically reshapes how you enter in on the friction moments, on the tension moments, on the conflict moments, and radically rechanges how you treat that person, right? And so, yeah, I definitely say the one is not some magical, mythical. I putting those. That's hilarious how I put those two words together. The one is not a magical, mythical person out there, but is instead literally the person you just said I do to, and then they become the one. Then that changes how you're going to be married, how you're going to treat them, how you're going to see the philosophy of marriage, for sure. And I think way more serves you better in the trenches when actually stuff goes tough.
Yeah. Jeff, you devote a lot of your time to cultivating community. Obviously, you do it in your home.
Yep.
You do it with your family team, but you also do it with other men, with other families. The work you're doing with family teams, Primal Path, connection between fathers and sons. So clearly, community is a high priority for you. Can you talk to us about why that is? And
the main answer is just because it's so rich, right? Like it's a real thing that we are in the loneliest culture ever. Like stats show that, the graphs show that we're getting lonelier. We spend more time alone every single year than the year before. And that's just crazy, right? And even back to with a full circle moment of we purchase loneliness, like we are in that epidemic. So I've found my life is absolutely all the blessings of it, my greatest moments, all of the reasons I've grown so much, all of my job opportunities, you can go on and on and on, are because of other people. Just like rooms I'm in, conversations I've had, heart-to-hearts I've had, dinners I've had, people over, stayed at our house, hospitality, all these different types of things. So then I look back on that and I'm like, okay, if that's true, then how do I reverse engineer just creating that in my life? Rather than like, oh, I'm just going to let it happen, which it won't, by the way, in our culture. It won't just happen. You will be lonely if you just expect everyone to invite you to places, or you absolutely have to attack it, aggressively go after it, invite people, do things, and go for it, or else you'll just be lonely. It's just the truth of where we live. So if that's true, then why would I not just want to try to create that in my future? And so, some of my richest, deepest, best moments are like, around a fire or at a dinner table, almost guaranteed. I could probably name like 10 really deep, formative moments to me in my heart, my trajectory, a question that got answered or something that just unlocked in my heart at those things. And it's funny, I joke too, like, especially guys are super lonely right now. And I think that's an epidemic. But you think about like a fire, how easy it is to get guys together. So like I'll do this thing where I'll just send out a text like maybe once a quarter and just be like, I'm a cigar and a bourbon guy. Sorry if you aren't. So I'll just send out a text to like 15 guys and just be like, hey, Tuesday night, bourbon's on me, cigars on me, like my house, 7 p.m. fire, we'll hang, we'll talk. And like people show up. Sometimes it's 2 people because it's like everyone's got something. Sometimes it's all 15. And we just hang, no agenda, but I do try to go, I try to make it intentional, meaning like there's zero agenda, but we're not just talking about like football.
Yeah.
So I'll have a couple questions. Like one really good question you can ask is, what's the hardest thing you've gone through this year? That'll easily can fill a night. One really good question that I think can go fun or serious or however it goes is, what's something you're more passionate about and less passionate about than you were 5 years ago? That's a very fun question because it can go all over the map. So 5 years ago, what were you more passionate or less passionate about than you are now? And that can go political, that can go theological, that can go serious, that can go funny. You can go a lot of these different questions. They're really fun. You just need one of those and it literally fills the night.
Yeah.
What I do think is funny is how much a fire makes it easier to hang. Like because we'll sit in a circle and talk about our hearts around a fire and it feels normal. But if I literally invited a guys to the same thing with no fire, how weird. Hey guys, if the text said, hey guys, come over, we're going to sit in a circle and talk about our hearts, no one would come. But the only difference is I put a fire in the middle. Fire is like the ultimate life hack for community.
And bourbon.
Yeah, and bourbon, true. But fire is the ultimate life hack. I absolutely believe that. You light a fire and it is crazy. Like think about that. We can all think about that with our campgrounds, camp memories. Like, it's it's almost like it's sacred and spiritual for sure. So I would say just light a fire and just start talking and hanging. But yeah, community is so important, man. So it takes a lot of effort. Like we have a budget for it in our family of like dinners and taking dinners to people, inviting people to dinners, fire, the bourbon, the cigars, like it adds up. But it's so rich when you just constantly do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the model that it sets for your kids.
100%. They always see us having people over. And then sometimes if it's earlier in the night, then it's family hangs. So then other kids are around and we're just barbecuing and there's no agenda, but you can always nudge it intentionally for sure.
I always say there's a correlation between my level of heart happiness and the number of shoes we have at our front door.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
And so
that's surprising too in Orlando because I've like that's known as a Hawaii thing, but I didn't think it was as much in the mainland. That yes, like you can go over to someone's house and that because Hawaii it's no shoes in the house anywhere in the state, so it's like a thing. I think it kind of comes from the Japanese, Korean kind of culture, but Yeah, you go to like our Thanksgiving, it was like 50 shoes, 100 shoes, 200 shoes on the porch. It's hilarious.
That's incredible. I mentioned this at the top of the episode, Jeff, but our mission with this show, we've talked about it, is to see a gospel-centered home made available to every single child in the foster care system. One of the stats that we say all the time, there are 400,000 kids in foster care, and there are 400,000 churches in America. We believe the church can step up and solve this problem in our lifetime. What are your thoughts on foster care and adoption?
Well, I think there's some things in the scripture that are suggestions, and I think there's some things that are mandates. I wouldn't necessarily like being a foster parent in the U.S. system is a mandate, but I certainly also wouldn't say it's a suggestion, meaning I do feel like it almost falls in the strong suggestion model. And what I mean by that is because the scriptures are very clear that what is mandated in the scriptures, when some stuff is not, is taking care of the orphan, the widow, and like the homeless and the people with no resources. And so I don't know many other things in our culture that get eerily close to a command like that. So I think, yes, I think every family, if they are decently not sinking, needs to have the conversation for that exact reason, especially as Christians. Like, we could solve this, right? And so I don't think it's for every family at all, but I wish it was more of like a default conversation that needs to happen in every family. Yeah. And then you need to be you need to be able to articulate why you're not.
Yeah. And the thing that I often end up talking about, right now, Lisa and I are in the process of taking the foster care classes, so we're not foster parents yet. But there are so many other ways to serve outside of actually becoming a foster family
100%.
yourself. And so whether that's coming around a family that is fostering.
Well, even like you mentioned, 400,000 foster and 400,000 churches. Yeah, that's not even like every family. That's like one church adopting
family.
Yeah, exactly.
One church.
Yes, and then the whole church can support resources.
Yes.
So we have probably 4 or 5 families very close to us that foster. And it's 100% like, what do you need? And every family has different missions and visions. For us, we might relook at it in the future. But for us, it's not for us in our season. But what is for us is we do feel a little bit more highly resourced than most families. And so we just are like funneling, like, what do you need? What can we do? We'll pay everything for them that year. Yeah. Don't take on the financial burden. There was even one, this is actually a really cool story real quick that kind of ties into the family team thing too. So, we've tithed to a church over the years, but there's also been some years where I struggle with that theologically. Sorry if you are listening, we can have another conversation about the theology of tithing to a institutional church. I believe in the concept of tithing, but where should it go? So for a season, what we did is I would just put the money in a certain bank account. I would just 10% all the time and sometimes even more. And it would add up over time. And the reason I did this is because I wanted this, I think I talked about this at family teams. I wanted to establish what I call like the family giving account. So instead of just giving it to a church, I wanted it to feel more real to the kids. And so for us, it was the family giving account. And then we would just say, hey, you guys are on our team. And so if you hear of any, like, this is for needs. So it's not just like default. We don't just give it away. It stocks up until we see needs and feel needs and sense needs. So pray about needs, ask for needs, look for needs. And the kids would come to us of like, hey, like, during Christmas time, maybe the Salvation Army, stuff like that. And so we were like, yeah, we got and what it does is when you already have it set aside, by the way, it does one really cool thing. One, it's a default yes, not a default no. Because if you have money, if someone comes to you and asks they need help, you kind of go, I gotta look at the budget. Well, if I just know exactly that I have an account that I can't touch for anything but giving, and I know what the money is, and they ask, it's just like, oh yeah, sure, boom, done. So it almost feels like Oprah because it's like instant because you don't even have to think about it. So it totally kind of life hacks the psychology of it. First of all, second of all, integrates the kids. Constantly say, what do you want to give to? What do you want to give to? Third of all, getting full circle with the moment. We were doing that for a while, probably 9, 10 months, a year almost went by where no needs. So it was stacking up. Like the money was getting a lot in there. I think we got up to like $30,000, $40,000 in there. So that's like a ton of money. We're like, what do we want to do with this, right? And that's the most we'd ever have to give away. And at that point in our marriage. And again, it was just the Lord. Like, look how he works. Like no one was like, no needs. We were praying, nothing on our heart. And then we get a call from one of our friends. He's actually an Integrated. He told this story at Integrated last Integrated. And he was like, hey, me and my wife are thinking about adopting. And, and this is like 10 years ago, back before GoFundMe was super popular. He's like, there's this website. We might try to like have people like try to give to it. We just, you guys have told us that you wanted to support. So I just wanted to let you know, and I'll send you the link. And maybe if you can just help out with a little bit. And I just, on the phone, I go, how much is it? And he's like, the whole thing's like 30 grand. I said, done. We can do that. And he was like, no, he just couldn't believe it. He like died. He's like, no, I didn't mean, I meant like a couple $100. Like, you know what I mean? And then I was like, no. And then the surrealness of that now, knowing that like we funded that adoption, and he even says the same thing. Like he even got choked up about it, telling the story at Integrated like 8 years later.
Yeah.
Man, what it did to connect us, what it did to connect the kids, what it did to tell that story to the kids, what it did. And so like every family is different, but that's a long story short of like, okay, we use that version of how our family can support these different types of things in those environments. And I think that's a lot there too. But also I also suggest every family get a family giving account. Even if it's a couple $100, just every month put tithe into it and let the kids serve. And and sometimes it's only that because we try to keep it lean. So sometimes it's $1,000, sometimes it's $500, and we're paying for groceries, we're paying for rent. We're just like, it's just such a fun way to constantly give as a family team. Yeah.
So in closing here, Jeff, we're coming up on time, so I've got a couple more questions for you. One, I mentioned it in your intro.
I'm loving this, by the way. We should have multi-hour podcasts more often. This is fun.
I mentioned this in the intro, but tell our listeners more about Bible Builds. When I heard about it,
it is fun.
You and I were texting about it. I was like, what?
So it's actually an idea I got from this 10-year-old kid. So I was on Facebook, and just because I had a mutual friend with his dad, because he's like no platform, nothing like that, I just saw him during COVID. This 10-year-old kid who has a really entrepreneurial dad created a little business called Bible Builds. And basically the business, when I found it, was him on an iPhone retelling a Bible story. So just like, hey, let me tell you Genesis 1. In Genesis 1, God does this, this, and this, and this. And it's like 5 minutes long. And then he would send, and you have to pay $10 a month to be a part of this business. And then he would send you this video, and then on Sunday he would send you the video, and then from Sunday to Sunday that week you have to build that story with Legos back home. And then you turn it in, you turn the picture in, and then you can like win an Amazon gift card, or you get voted on who's best, and different prizes and badges. It wasn't that developed yet, actually. Then it was just like, I think you just send it in and one person wins or something. Yeah. And I just thought, I was like, and I'm obsessed with Lego, like literally obsessed. I have all the sets. We went to the store yesterday. I'm like, it's just crazy. It's I have so many sets. I've probably spent like 15, 20 grand on Legos over the last, it's like, cause they're like $500. I buy all the big sets. So it's like every year, 1 or 2, it's insane. And over time, but I love it. And we're obsessed. So I saw that. I saw Lego, which I'm obsessed with. And I saw Bible, which I'm obsessed with. It's like, this is me. So seriously. So I was like, this is so me. And I just totally saw like, oh my goodness, this could be something so much better. Yeah. And bigger, and it's an amazing idea and so cool, and such a cool way to get like kids' hands dirty with really what it is. It's memory retention, because when you're hearing a story and then you have to build it, they never forget the story. So it's like one full week of like just encoding a Bible story. You do that week after week, they'll have the whole Bible. So I hit up his dad, and I literally just treated it like Shark Tank, just bought it. I just like said, we kind of settled on a number. He was so jacked because the kid was into Shark Tank and all that. And I think I gave him like 10 or 15 grand because based on how many members he had. And I definitely overpaid, but I wanted to like bless him and make it, and I knew I was going to be able to make that back quick. And
what an experience what you probably set off in that.
Yeah. For a 10-year-old kid.
For a 10-year-old to sell a business.
No, 100%.
At 10 years
old. For 15
old.
grand, for 10 grand. That's huge.
You just launched a serial entrepreneur.
No, exactly. 100%. So it was like, I knew what I was doing, and it was super fun and cool, and it just matched up. And so I bought it. We totally revamped it. We're like same premise, but like way elevated. So shoot the curriculum in a studio now, green screen, animators.
Do you fly him to
Yeah, so I would fly him in, and or we would fly to California. And sometimes he's on him, sometimes I'm on him. We also have a couple of different like hosts we use now for some women we want on. And Natalie, if you're listening, shout out to you. She's amazing. So like I wanted to basically treat it as like a high-end curriculum now that like churches could use and TV could use, and which it is. It's like licensed by Yippee now. So it's the same program, but like really high-end back-end website now with where you turn it in, thousands of members. It's a really cool like community now. And then the curriculum's really strong. And so we license that out for churches. 2 years in. So we've done 150 videos, or because we do one a week. So we're a lot. So we've probably gone through 6 or 7 Bible books now, maybe 10. So like it's a compound interest thing where it's just going to keep growing with like the library. And now like homeschool parents buy it because they want to use it for their Bible in the week. And like, it's fun.
And does Ryland still Is he still kind of guiding like, hey, these are the stories we want to tell, or is that
he's definitely gone more from like the operator to like talent. So he kind of is really just on video now, but yeah, definitely get his input and ask him and stuff like that. But I usually pick a lot of it and I don't write the scripts anymore because it's too labor intensive, but I wrote the first 50 probably. And yeah, so we have like a team now that does the scripts, but it's fun.
And you mentioned buying it with your daughter. What was her involvement?
Yeah, basically. So I asked her, I was like, cause I back to the family teams thing, you know, I definitely want to always try to integrate them into businesses, but I have a lot of businesses where like there's just not a lot of it's like, that just doesn't fit, or it's just a lot of office work, you know what I mean? So I wanted to do one where it's like, hey, we could do it more together. So yeah, so she's on video, she's helping with the ideas, she's in a lot of the media. So it's just like a fun way to integrate her, is like I just kind of put her similar to Ryland, where she's like part of the team online.
Yeah.
And so it's really fun to like, she gets to speak into it, she gets to build, I get to run stuff by her as like an actual expert because she knows Lego better than I do. Like, you know, stuff like that. So it's like really fun.
Yeah. And then you have
and she gets paid through it too, which is really fun, which she loves. She loves getting paid.
So open enrollment like a couple times a year.
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 times a year we open for like a week. I'm not sure when the next one is, but yeah, just BibleBuilds.com. People can check it out. But it's super fun.
And like $10 a month, 15.
Yeah, I think it's like $10 a month. Or no, I think it's $15 a month or $99 for the year, which gives you it almost half off. So you can like, you know, then it ends up being like $7 or $8 a month if you buy the year. But yeah,
I love it.
It's fun.
I love it. Now I want you to tell listeners how they can sign up for the next Family Teams live event. I mean, it was a transformational event.
Yes.
For
we would love people to come. We definitely consider that, because Family Teams is such a philosophical like paradigm shift.
Yeah.
That it really is tough to get that online. We have a lot of stuff you can if you're a self-learner, but we always encourage people like come to a live event. It's like a 1.5 full immersion Q&A. Like it just feels like you can walk away getting it.
Yep.
You can wrap your arms around it. And so I actually don't know when the next one is, to be honest, but we do 1 or 2 a year. Familyteams.com. So familyteams.com, I think you can actually go familyteams.com/weekend to go to the specific page. But if you want all the resources, we have scouting reports on familyteams.com that will help you like identify your kids' giftings. 5-Minute Fatherhood is on there with like 300 episodes of practical advice. We have conferences, as you talked about. We have calendars. We have books. So yeah, just familyteams.com has like, it's probably one of the most rich content libraries I've ever seen on a website, but there's a ton.
We've got the calendar hanging up in our
people love the calendar
on our door. I see that Instagram ad all the time.
Oh, dude,
so you've figured out that.
Yes.
So how can our listeners stay connected? Obviously, you've got a ton of things going on. What's the best? Is it Instagram? Is it?
Yeah, I would probably say yes. Yeah. Not website, not Twitter, not Facebook for me, even though I'm on all those things. I'm probably most active on Instagram. So if you really want to actually like, what am I doing? What's going on? Yeah, I'm just at Jefferson Bethke, and then Alyssa is at Alyssa Joy Bethke. But yeah, I'm on there. That's probably my main. I love Instagram. I
love it. Awesome. Well, if you want to learn more about how you and your family can help end the foster care crisis in America, text the word freedom to 833-370-1610. That's 833-370-1610. Jeff, thank you so much for this conversation.
This was fun.
This was a blast, and we're out.